Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description.
Karina stood on the threshold of her small house and watched the snowflakes dance. They seemed to glow in the moonlight. One snowflake landed on the girl's cheek and immediately melted on her warm skin. This distracted the girl from contemplating the natural miracle. She glanced at her watch, 23:59. The clock would soon strike. And at that very second, the first strike of the clock was heard on the TV in the living room. Tears came to her eyes. Once again, on such a holiday, she herself. If only there had been someone with her that day. It didn't matter who. Just not herself. A star fell in the sky. And then another. Karina counted 9. That's strange, it's not the season for shooting stars, the girl was surprised as she entered the house. And just in time, because otherwise she would have been even more surprised. However, in the near future she will have many opportunities to make up for lost time. Karina settled down on the sofa and stared at the TV. Despite the abundance of dishes on the table, the girl did not touch the food. She had no appetite. This was the third New Year she had celebrated alone. All since that car accident 3.5 years ago, when her parents and little brother died. She miraculously escaped with only bruises. She was found a few meters from the burning car. The girl herself did not remember how she jumped out of the car. Since then, her aunt became her guardian. However, Karina did not want to live under the same roof with 5 cousins, so she stayed in her parents' house. Instead, her aunt came once a week to check on her ward and make sure nothing inappropriate had happened. The first months, she was strictly controlled. All her relatives were afraid that, if left alone, Karina would get into the wrong company, as her aunt put it. But the girl had enough brains and common sense to avoid such companies. She withdrew into herself. Her character deteriorated and only her best friend, Marinka, could tolerate her for a long time. Even today, she refused an invitation to celebrate the New Year with her family. However, out of habit, she prepared a full refrigerator of food. She and her mother often cooked. She was distracted from her thoughts and turned her attention back to the TV. The congratulations were over and now a singer unknown to Karina was singing from the screen. Suddenly, where would we be without this suddenly? There was a knock on the door, but the girl ignored it. Her friends and relatives were far away now, and she didn't want to talk to beggars at all. However, those who were thirsty for her attention were not distinguished by a large reserve of patience. A few seconds later, the door was torn off its hinges and, together with the frosty air, 8 adult men, Karina counted them later, and a girl tumbled into the hallway. To say that Karina was surprised would be an understatement. She had never experienced such intrusions in her life before. She was even more surprised when she took a closer look at the group. In front of everyone stood a huge guy with blue skin and some kind of shaft in his hands. May Kisame forgive me for insulting his Samahata. It seemed that he was the one to blame for the current more than deplorable state of the front door. Next stood a red-haired guy with piercings. I got it wrong, arm in arm with the only girl in the group. The rest were not so impressive in appearance. However, these oddities could easily be attributed to New Year's costumes. Her gaze quickly but tenaciously ran over all 9 and ran into the doorway. What the? Karina immediately pounced on the culprit of the problem. What are you doing here? This is private property, by the way. Despite her anger and irritation, not a single curse word escaped the girl's lips. She did not recognize them and used them very rarely. But Karina's gaze could kill on the spot. It was so scary that Kisame, for whom it was intended, swallowed and took a step back. But since the hallway was too small and the guests were standing quite close together, he naturally pushed pain. He dragged Konan along with him and they fell on Haiden and Kakuzu, who then knocked down the rest. In a few seconds, a heap formed in the hallway. Kisame, you idiot, what are you doing? The redhead yelled. Sorry, Leader Sama, the blue-skinned man groaned. Haiden, you tore my cloak, a hoarse voice was heard, I'll deduct it from your fee for the next mission. Oh, Zayas and Sama, why did I get such a partner, was heard in response. And then another phrase that is not worth writing, the censors will cut it out anyway. Of all people, Haydn never skimped on strong words, smiley face. Everyone was screaming at the same time until, "I'm going to turn this house into art right now," someone yelled from the floor. "No," everyone says in unison. But it's too late. Cats. And nothing happened. And then silence fell. Not a rustle, not a sigh could be heard. Even Karina froze, not understanding what had just happened, or rather, what had not happened, but imbued with the general atmosphere. But she was the first to come to her senses. "Hello, Grandfather Frost," the girl exhaled, not understanding why she remembered this childhood phrase. But it served as a signal. The guests jumped up from the floor and began to bend their fingers, each in their own way. From the crowd, every now and then, one could hear, "Katan. Water shaft. Oh, Zayasan-sama." And some other unintelligible words. But things did not progress further. Finally, everyone calmed down and Karina decided to remind everyone about herself. "Ahem ahem. Who are you? And what are you doing here?" asked the one who had overdone it with the piercing. She could not stand such impudence. "I would like to know who you are. And what are you doing in my house?" With each phrase her tone grew louder and in the end she screamed, "And what is it about my door that you don't like?" Everyone looked at each other, but the redhead continued to speak. "I won't repeat this conversation full of Haydn's obscene remarks, Itachi's frowns, Kakuzu's curses and remarks that stumped one or the other side of the negotiations. But, in the end, the door was fixed back, and the guests sat down at the table. Yes, it was worth giving up my aunt's family feast for this. Everyone ate salads and cabbage rolls with gusto, which Karina had prepared with such diligence. The guests especially liked the latter. Only the silent guy, painted in black and white, did not touch the food and looked strangely at Muska, Karina's elderly cat. His gastronomic preferences were revealed later. "We had to urgently defrost a piece of beef, otherwise the cat could not be saved." "So, where are we going to sleep?" the leader of the organization, what was it called? Akatki asked as if nothing had happened. "You have to come up with something like that. It's enough to break his tongue. So what if he's boneless?" "So, where are we going to sleep?" the leader asked, as if nothing had happened. "What do you mean?" Karina was shocked. She still thought it was some kind of New Year's prank. "Well, the guys confused December with October. For reference, October 31st is Halloween." "Well, they overdid it a bit. For reference, the very little." The girl kept waiting for this circus to end and for them to leave her alone, but no, the show began to drag on and the girl, for the umpteenth time that evening, which is unusual for her under normal circumstances, lost her temper. "Get out of my house." The guests clearly did not like this address. Everyone froze. The air was tense. But Payne answered for everyone again. "You seem to have a poor understanding of what's going on," the guy hissed menacingly, leaning toward the mistress of the house. But Karina was no slouch either. Without thinking twice, which was a waste of time, but fortunately she didn't think about it then, the girl grabbed a pepper spray from her pocket and sprayed it into the leader's eyes. She had taken the can out of the nightstand at the beginning of the evening. "Don't come near," she squeaked in fear. The girl couldn't do more. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was a blow to the head. Karina woke up tied to a chair. The guests were still nearby. The girl was told in the simplest and most understandable way that, first of all, she is not sleeping and this is not a nightmare. Secondly, this is not a New Year's masquerade, but it is not a robbery either. What could have been stolen from her, except for her mobile phone? Thirdly, she was surrounded by very serious criminals, though not from this world. "You're nuts." The other world was the last straw. "Tomorrow the aunt will come and if she catches you here, she'll call the cops, and they won't stand on ceremony with you." Out of fear, the girl began to behave defiantly. The psychos moved away from the captive for a meeting. "Leader Sama, we have no options. In this world, chakra does not listen to us. We will not be able to perform even basic techniques, and we do not know anything about the enemy's weapons. And I dare to assume that in this situation, we are much weaker." "Shut up, I know that without you," Payne snapped. "It looks like there's no other choice, we'll have to negotiate." We have nowhere to go anyway. Karina was untied and informed of the situation. Realizing that she could not live otherwise, the girl agreed to help. Just make sure you're not here by lunch tomorrow. Otherwise, what will I tell my relatives? Having placed their unwanted accomplices for the night, there was no room to swing a cat on the floor. The girls went to what had once been their parents' bedroom, where there was a double bed. However, despite the fact that their sleeping places were the most comfortable, neither Karina nor Conan could fall asleep for a long time. They all chatted like old friends, telling about their worlds. Karina did not feel any threat from the guest and even suspected that she could count on her support. The girl never got a good night's sleep. As soon as it began to get light, some very immodest movement began in her modest house. Muska, get out. The sleepy owner of the temporary shelter, or den, whichever you prefer, did not immediately remember about her night guests, and therefore attributed the ringing of the broken vase and the tickling of her cheek to an innocent cat. And how could the same cat be in two places at the same time? And these pajamas suit you, yes. Karina even jumped up on the bed in surprise. Why Day, what was his name next, this blonde guy? For you, Kaori, just Day is fine, the impudent fellow agreed. It doesn't matter, the girl waved her hand, almost touching the guest's long bangs. She was sick to death of correcting new acquaintances yesterday. It seemed that it was easier for them to come up with a new name for her than to remember her own. And all of them at once. The girl herself honestly tried to call them as they introduced themselves to her, but so far it wasn't working out very well. She had a bad memory for names in general. It was easier for Karina to memorize a 2-page poem than the name of the teacher who had given her homework. Get out of my bed, the girl suddenly came to her senses. The young man did not frighten her at all, unlike Payne, whom she tried to avoid. The blonde obediently got out of bed, but did not take another step, watching the girl. Get out of the room, Karina no longer shouted, as she realized that Day liked it when she raised her voice. It was as if he was deliberately trying to irritate her. I'll change and go out now. Looking at her watch, Karina was horrified. It was just past 7. She had slept for no more than 3 hours. She felt exhausted and could compare herself with the shards of a vase lying near the sideboard with a clear conscience. But the guests were cheerful and everyone was busy with their own business. Conan was casting a spell in the kitchen. Kakuzu and Haydn were quietly arguing about something. Deidara and Sasori were also arguing, but not at all quietly, so from time to time shouts like Art is eternal or Art is cats swept through the Duma. The girl had no idea what cats was, but she realized that it was not at all eternal. Kisame was very interested in her aquarium, and Karina really wanted to joke about his appearance, but she held back, not knowing what to expect from this blueskin giant. Itachi was calmly sitting in a chair and looking through the newspapers. Zetsu seemed to be dozing standing in the corner by the stove. But the leader was nowhere to be seen. After drinking a cup of strong coffee, Karina felt better. The relatives were not supposed to arrive until midday, so there was time to clean up the house and decide what to do with the guests. The girl was moved by Conan's words and even partially believed in their otherworldly origin. Moreover, she considered herself partly involved in their appearance in this world. She should not have made a wish on New Year's Eve. With these thoughts, the girl began cleaning, which turned out to be not such an easy task, considering how many people were crowded in the house. She even tried to harness the guests to the work, but after 2 cups broken by Day, it looked like the guy was washing dishes for the first time and nearly overturned sideboard. For some reason the workers decided that it would be easier to wash the floor under it if they moved the furniture to the next room, and a miraculously intact vacuum cleaner, who would have thought that it would scare the dozing Zetsu so much? She decided not to risk it and continued on her own. Closer to 11, Payne returned. It turned out that he was trying to find the funnel that had sucked them into this world and thrown them out in Karina's garden. But I didn't find anything. Payne was irritated. Not a trace. He impulsively pulled off his winter jacket. When did he even have time to rummage around in the pantry, and threw it on the floor? Darling, Kaori just cleaned up, Conan gently reproached him, for which Karina was very grateful. The owner herself would never have dared to do something like that. Everything around was covered in snow. I couldn't even pinpoint the exact location of the release. Without a Rinnegan, I'm afraid we won't get out of here. And what is Rinnegan? Karina decided to ask. I'll explain it to you later, Sasori whispered in her ear. Okay. Everyone looked at the girl in surprise, and she glanced at her watch. And she was horrified. The hands of the mechanism moved inexorably towards 12 o'clock. So, it's time for you to go. She began to push the men out of the house, but, noticing how light their coats were, she changed her mind and rushed to the pantry. As the girl noted, many of them didn't even have a shirt under their coats, at best a light t-shirt. Karina grinned. She was so indignant when her relatives, having decided to set up a warehouse here, brought a whole bunch of old clothes that no one was going to wear anymore, but it was a pity to throw them away. Well, they came in handy. Now, at least they wouldn't freeze to death before the evening. The girl already understood that the aliens had nowhere to go, and she would have to tolerate them for some time. Having given them winter uniforms, Karina nevertheless pushed everyone out into the street. Only she and Conan remained in the house. It was necessary to agree on the Kunoichi's legend and some details, so as not to fail the interrogation that the aunt would definitely arrange. They decided to introduce Conan as Alona. The girl barely remembered the name, an origami teacher at the university where Karina studied. By the way, the girl's parents, I'm talking about Karina now, were economists and she herself was going to follow in their footsteps, but her guardians decided that it would be better for the girl to enroll in an art school. And since she drew, to put it mildly, poorly, and in fact, simply disgustingly, she was enrolled in parallel courses. And Karina decided to pretend that origami was one of the electives. So, the pseudo-Alona allegedly helped a lagging student. Around 12:30, the aunt and uncle arrived. After congratulating their niece on the new year and meeting the young teacher, they carefully examined the house and, having made sure that everything was in order, went about their business, leaving their ward to study. Conan's legend was taken at face value. The aunt only asked Conan to show the art of origami. It's a good thing that Day wasn't around, otherwise they would have learned a lot about the true art, but seeing how deftly the girl handled paper, they were convinced of her professionalism. They didn't ask their niece's guest any more questions. Yes, sometimes a hangover is a great thing. Towards evening, everyone gathered in the, thank God, large kitchen. Over tea, they discussed the prospects for the future. A very joyless picture emerged. It looks like we're here for a long time, the leader concluded. But what can we do without chakra? Conan sighed in response. I'm not some kind of incompetent, the demolition man immediately became indignant. Calm down, Day, Karina patted him on the shoulder. The problem is not that you don't have talent, I'm sure that you are capable of much even without chakra, but you don't have documents. And without them, you can't get anywhere in my world. And it's risky for Kisame and Zetsu to go outside, they'll hand you over to the Kunstkamera at any moment. Where, the shark-like creature perked up. To the circus, noticing the puzzled looks of those around her, Karina just waved her hand, explaining to them would take the whole evening. And she would rather sit down and read a book. She only started yesterday. The main character had just gotten into another world with the help of a medallion. I know. It dawned on the girl. She jumped up and ran for the laptop. If you can't use your techniques, then we need an artifact that can transport you back. Is this the artifact? Payne asked, interested in the laptop. No, but you can search for information on the internet. Enter what? The internet. It would take too long to explain, I'll show you. With these words, the girl turned on the computer. She showed the capabilities of the laptop and the World Wide Web, trying to explain the principle of their operation as simply as possible. But soon almost everyone got bored. The guests from another world found the TV much more interesting. Only Kakuzu remained next to the girl. The shinobi surprisingly quickly mastered the computer. And even when Karina, tired, went to bed, he continued to look for the artifact. But it was like looking for a needle in a haystack, and without a magnet. The days of waiting dragged on. Kakuzu disappeared on the internet. Payne tried to awaken his chakra, as did the others. And in the end, the shinobi were able to find their chakra. But it was too suppressed, and would not have helped in battle. For example, Itachi, in order to create a flame like a lighter, spent so much energy that he felt like he had used Amaterasu. And Karina began to get used to such a life. She was no longer afraid of her lodgers. Moreover, the girl began to like such a life. She made friends, albeit unusual ones. She found common interests with Kakuzu. Regarding the internet, the shinobi was delighted with it. She became friends with Conan. She stopped being afraid of pain. She tried to flirt with Deidara. And, most surprisingly, she learned their names. But she became closest to Sasori. The puppeteer was the only one who had the patience to answer the curious girl's endless questions. I wanted to write Curious Karina, but he looks too much like Varvara. And to Karina, this red-haired young man seemed the most adequate of the whole group. By the way, Sasori was not a puppet in this world. And the girl instinctively reached out to him. She even hid behind his back when the leader was raging. But all good things must come to an end. Karina stretched sweetly on the bed. Conan, as always, had already stood up. But instead of her, also as always, her hand came across Day, who was sprawled out next to her. Not paying attention to the blonde, the girl finished her morning ritual. "Good morning, beautiful." Yes, the demolitionist greeted her. She smiled in response and habitually pushed him off the bed. "Good," she finally answered. Day woke her up like this every morning. And Karina didn't mind at all. She liked this game, at least until the guy crossed the line. Out of habit, the girl headed to the kitchen. She wanted to bake some pancakes for tea today. And such a crowd would need a lot of pancakes. Entering the kitchen, the girl glanced at the empty cat bowl. She hadn't found Muska yesterday. And was told that the old cat had most likely become Zetsu's prey. Green admitted his guilt and was nearly strangled by the small and fragile-looking girl. Karina had been calmed down with difficulty, and then had to be given valerian all evening. The girl still hadn't spoken to the cat-eater. When the pancakes were finally ready and everyone sat down to drink tea, Kakuzu's joyful cry was heard from the next room. "Found it." The man burst into the kitchen carrying a laptop. "Tomorrow, January 10th, 20, an auction will be held in the City Hall building." At the last moment, another lot was added, the medallion of Sancher the Seer. He read an excerpt from the morning newspaper. "There's another picture here. I found information about this medallion. According to legend, its creator could use his creation to move through space. But apparently, some kind of magic is needed to activate it." Magic. A couple of weeks ago I would have said that magic does not exist. But I did not know you then. Karina shared. "I think that your chakra is an analog of magic. But I am not completely sure. Don't you think it's strange that such an artifact surfaced so timely, and in the same city where we ended up?" Itachi doubted. "I think he found us himself," Zetsu suggested. "It's as if you became a magnet for him," Karina continued his thought. "Your chakra could have drawn him here. But do we have enough of it to activate the medallion?" "We only have one shot," Conan said. "And then, if we fail, the authorities will catch us." "We have no choice," Pain pronounced. "We'll have to take risks." "We are with you, Leader Sama." The guys were excited about this opportunity. Conan, Itachi, and Sasori were sent to scout the area. The shinobi had settled into the city in just a couple of days, and now Karina was not afraid that they would do something ridiculous. Only Kisame and Kakuzu stood out, but those two rarely went outside. And Zetsu did not go far from the stove in such frost. Everyone was busy with their own affairs, and Karina got bored. The girl decided to check on her laptop and the man who was disappearing behind it. She quietly, it seemed that way to her, but in fact, the shinobi's sensitive hearing immediately caught her steps, approached her friend and looked over his shoulder. What she saw shocked her. "What did you do with my computer?" The poor thing was horrified, almost collapsing onto the floor. "Nothing special," the financier shrugged, deftly clicking his fingers on the keyboard. "I just adjusted it to suit myself." "Just set it up?" You. Karina couldn't find the words to express the horror of what she saw, so I'll say it. In fact, it wasn't that scary. Kakuzu just set up the computer so that all its functions were written in Japanese. Plus, all incoming files were also automatically translated into his native language. How he had achieved this on his own, Karina did not know, but she could not have done it herself. Besides, the newly minted genius programmer had learned to hack servers and masterfully bypass computer protection in a matter of days. And now he was actively and not without pleasure carrying out the leader's task. Or rather, he was getting information about the City Hall building and the security system. This could be guessed from the schemes that popped up on the screen from time to time. And the notes to them, naturally, in Japanese. I wanted to sit at the computer for a couple of minutes, but it looks like I'll have to ask you, Karina sighed. I'm listening carefully. Kakuzu had already studied the character of the mistress of the house in which they were temporarily staying well enough to understand that Karina would not distract him from his work over trifles. Look at the information on this, a pause, during which the girl tries to remember the name of the creator of the medallion. Santiara? The newbie hacker prompted. Exactly. And more about the medallion itself, Karina agreed. 10 minutes later. In the living room. Pain. The leader winced at the loud shout and familiarity. Although it was time to get used to the fact that the girl ignored all suffixes and prefixes. She learned to pronounce their names without mistakes, and thank you for that. Pain almost shuddered at the memory of how Karina tried to call him Pettia. Pain did not consider it necessary to think about the fact that the Akatsuki themselves completely ignored the girl's real name, calling her Kaori. Karina was especially irritated when Day called her Kaori-chan, and the demolition man liked to tease her, and therefore 10 times a day he heard. Kaori-chan. Day, stop it. Kaori-chan. This is the last time I ask. But the problem is that there were a great many of these last times. Kakuzu even secretly from Pain began to take bets on whether the girl would punch the demolition man in the face, or whether her natural kindness would prevail, and she would have to ask someone and guests. Moreover, Day himself was one of the first to make a bet. But the miser Kakuzu did not want to make the bets public. The intrigue grew, and with it the sizes of the bets. 3 remained calm, the leader, since he knew nothing about this disgrace, as well as Kakuzu and Karina, of course, after all, it was her idea initially. Leader Sama, Kakuzu supported his secret accomplice, new information about the medallion has been discovered. The shinobi's words made him look up from the newspaper. The medallion has a second name, the medallion of the 4 elements. Karina blurted out. 4? Day asked from somewhere over her shoulder. Yes. How much did you think? The girl was perplexed. Actually, Pain began a brief excursion into the theory of chakra use. There are 5 basic elements: water, air, fire, lightning, and earth. That's not counting dojutsu. But that's a completely different story. And we always counted 4 elements, without lightning. Karina was confused. But soon she threw unnecessary doubts and speculations out of her head. So, that is, she corrected herself, looking at the hacker, decided that in order to activate the artifact, you will need to act on it with all the elements at the same time. That is, 4. And, apparently, these will be water, air, fire, and earth. Kakuzu finished the report instead of the embarrassed girl. Pain nodded, indicating that he had heard the information, but said nothing. And only in the evening, when the General Council was convened, he began to lay out the plan. Everything was quite simple. Konan, Itachi, and Sasori were supposed to steal the medallion directly. Kisame and Haiden provided cover and physical strength. Well, not Konan, a fragile girl temporarily deprived of her chakra, to break doors/windows. Kakuzu provided support from a distance. His main task was to disable the alarm. Pain himself exercised command. And Zetsu could not be torn away from the stove with pliers. What Day was supposed to do, Karina realized too late. Otherwise, she would never have agreed to walk with him in the park early in the morning. The park, as if by chance, was not far from the city hall. And also, to activate it, we will need to use chakra, the leader said finally. Therefore, Itachi, you will need Katan, Kisame water, Zetsu, you will use the earth element, and I will provide air. All of the above, under pain of death, must not use techniques ahead of time. Otherwise, they will have to deal with Renegan later, Pain threatened, hoping that his subordinates would not remember that in this world his eyes were quite ordinary. However, the threats were unnecessary. Not a single shinobi would risk returning home. But Samahata can be used, the blue-skinned man didn't understand, for which he received dark looks from his comrades and a slap on the back of the head from his partner. Don't be stupid, Kisame, the leader forbade the use of chakra. There was no mention of weapons. So it's possible? Hashigate decided to play it safe. Yes, the Akatsuki answered in unison. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. Wrapping herself in the fluffy collar of her sheepskin coat and trying to warm her hands in the warm palms of her companion, Karina laughed at another joke of the blonde. What a pity that they were leaving soon. The girl clearly understood that she would miss Day's jokes and conversations with Sasori. Itachi would not sit in front of the TV for days on end, sometimes arguing with Haydn about the programs he had chosen to watch. The latter always tried to switch to adult programs. The morning would no longer begin with the curses of the immortal and the flirtations of the demolition man. Kisame would not occasionally glance carnivorously at her angelfish in the aquarium. And the laptop would again gather dust on the shelf, forgotten by its owner. Her best friend would also leave, following her beloved Pain. And she will even miss Green, even though he deprived her of her beloved purring cat. Why are you sad, beauty, The blonde did not miss her bad mood. Well, I just thought that the house would be empty without you, she didn't deny it. And I thought you were just waiting for us to leave, Day decided to joke. Well, in your case it is, the girl did not remain in debt. I meant Itachi and Sasori. It is so interesting to watch TV with the first one. And the second one carves amazing things out of wood, they are simply art. Karina finally finished off the demolition man. The girl, who had just started to cheer up, was interrupted by the wail of a police siren. Something went wrong with Akatsuki. Looks like I'll have to show you what real art is, Day sighed. A white clay bird appeared in his palm. What a cutie, the girl was touched when the feathered creature fluttered away from the blonde's palm. She's alive, Karina was amazed. Not exactly. No more than Senpai's puppets, the demolitionist explained. Get ready to run on the signal, he warned his companion. What signal? Karina didn't understand. To this. Cats. Grabbing the girl by the arm, the shinobi was already rushing out of the park. Choice Russian swear words were flying after them. Exo. Not all of them followed us, Day cursed, taking out a pistol on the go. Where did he manage to get one? Oh, I shouldn't have let them out on the street without an escort, and firing a few shots into the air. Karina was racing at the limit of her capabilities. And only Daidara's strong arms prevented her from falling on the slippery road. And the cops were racing on their heels. The blonde's task was to distract and lead the police away in case of complications. He took Karina for cover, combining business with pleasure. They managed to run quite far, but they could not break away from their tail. Then first the now useless pistol flew to the side, and then the man's winter jacket. The girl's heavy sheepskin coat awaited the same fate. And the couple did not stop for a moment. The cold penetrated to the bones, but it became easier to run. The speed immediately increased and, finally, they managed to hide from the representatives of the law. Why did you drag me into this? The girl was indignant, trying to catch her breath. She hadn't had to do such a run for a long time, especially over rough terrain. Sorry, Kaori-chan. I hoped that everything would be okay. Yes, the blonde tried to justify himself. You should have thought about it. Karina snapped. Well, we got away, Day continued trying. Idiot, this is a small town. Everyone knows each other here. And they saw me and the cops will be at my house within an hour. So, we need to hurry. Yes, the would-be pyrotechnician concluded and was about to take off when he realized that. Which way should we go? With a sigh, Karina trudged in the right direction. The excitement of running began to fade and she began to shake from the cold. Now she understood Zetsu perfectly. Trying to make amends, Day hugged the girl, warming her with his warmth, and quickened his pace. The seasoned body of a shinobi, it seemed, did not suffer from the cold at all. And so they reached the house. Pain, Kakuzu, and Zetsu were already waiting for them in the yard. The hacker was still rummaging through the computer. And from the other side of the street the rest of the organization was rapidly approaching. Kakuzu, Haydn was indignant, what the? The immortal's further monologue cannot be quoted due to censorship. But the gist of it was that the computer guy had screwed something up and that's why the alarm went off. I had no idea about the extra security measures, the financier countered. They probably just installed it last night. Meanwhile, the others were trying to activate the artifact. There was no time to lose, the police would be here any minute. Finally, on the third try, they succeeded. The medallion lit up and a funnel began to grow from it, through which a completely different world was visible. At the same time, shouts were heard from behind the gates, and people in uniform began to fill the yard. There was no time to say goodbye, and the guests from another world began to jump into the funnel one after another. The last thing the girl heard was happily, yes, from Day. The edges of the crater began to quickly tighten. Glancing at the yard, Karina noticed how the faces of the cops, who had managed to notice the magic, lengthened. I'm going to have serious problems, the girl still managed to think, clutching the chain of the medallion tighter. Are you crazy? This is Hayden's voice. No, Sasori answered calmly. And I like it, yes. Now I'll have to give the computer back, Kakuzu said with obvious regret. I don't see any problem here, Itachi's tone was as cold as ever. It will only be more fun this way, said Kisame. Karina listened in horror to her friend's squabble. What were they still doing here? Did nothing work out? What a mess they were in. I like this weather much better, Zetsu interrupted her thoughts. The girl stood with her back to the speakers. And with her eyes closed, opening them, she was afraid to see the service weapons of the cops, who had managed to flood her yard, pointed at her. She did not immediately realize that it had become much warmer around, and that no one else's voices could be heard. Finally, she decided to open one eye. And immediately regretted it. The bright light that hit her eyes caused a sharp headache. At the same time, a strong nausea came, forcing her to bend over. And here are the consequences of the transition for an untrained organism, Pain said. Akasuna started this mess, and he's the one who has to clean it up, he summed up. We've been blown north of the shelter, the black and white shinobi noted when the buzz of agreement/disagreement with the leader's decision died down. A second later, Karina felt someone's strong arms pick her up and press her to an unexpectedly hard chest. In her state, the girl had no time to look at the carrier. They walked for a long time, almost an hour. Karina even managed to doze off. 2 hours to get myself in order. And then I'll wait for everyone in my office, the girl heard through her sleep, and then everyone dispersed to their rooms. Another minute later, Karina felt herself being laid down on a soft bed. Get up, a familiar voice, the leader wanted to see you at the meeting. That's right, it's Sasori. Karina forced her eyes open. Fortunately, her condition had returned to normal. But she was terribly sleepy. The words stuck in her throat. She saw the interlocutor, whose appearance had changed dramatically. What happened to you? What do you mean? The puppet master didn't immediately understand. You, the girl carefully touched his cheek, are wooden? She herself couldn't believe her eyes. Oh, this? He was not at all embarrassed, this is my art. What? She was more likely to hear such a phrase from Deidara. I'll explain later. Now I need to hurry to the meeting. I still have to justify myself for dragging you here, Sasori waved it off, casting a critical glance at the girl. Dragged? Here? To our world. Through the funnel. No, you can't go like that. The shinobi began rummaging through the wardrobe. How is that possible? Karina was taken aback. With chakra threads. As soon as I passed through the funnel, I immediately felt a surge of strength. And then it was a matter of technique, as if confirming his words, Sasori moved his fingers, and the girl felt something tearing her from her place and dragging her to the guy. Wow, the girl admired. I want that too. Teach me. We'll see, having found nothing, his things were clearly too big for Karina. The shinobi began to pull off his black and red cloak. Here, wrap yourself in it for now. Sasori himself remained in trousers and a mesh t-shirt. So they went to the meeting. Everyone had already gathered in the room. They were the only ones waiting. There was only one question on the agenda, what to do with the problem named Kaori. Why did you even bring her here, the leader wondered. We couldn't leave her there, could we? After everything she's done for us, It would be at least unseemly to leave her to get out of the mess we got her into on her own, the guilty one tried to get through to Pain. And what do you propose? You can't accept a weak, untrained fighter into the organization every time you feel sorry for him. The words, like a slap in the face, hit Karina painfully. Now Pain was behaving completely differently than the girl was used to seeing him. Then, as if remembering something, the leader looked at the girl more closely. Instead of the usual gray, two hypnotizing eyes with an unusual purple iris, decorated with concentric circles, were looking at her. That's right, the chakra channels are almost undeveloped. If she does become a kunoichi, she'll be a weak one. Organizations like that aren't needed. She even. Pain didn't finish. Something caught his attention. After standing motionless for a few seconds, the shinobi began to form a seal. Karina watched his manipulations with interest. Itachi, everyone turned to the brunette. He didn't need any more explanations. Sharingan. At that very moment, Itachi's eyes changed color from coal black to blood red, with 3 commas. Wow. The girl admired. But nothing more. Everyone stared at the girl in surprise. And Itachi, not satisfied with the effect he had achieved, or rather the lack thereof, continued. Manjikyu Sharingan. The pattern on the pupil changed. Tsukuyami. Is this a technique? Karina asked incredulously. And I want that. What do you see? The leader asked impatiently. Itachi's hair is dyed red, don't you see? Only now did the girl notice that no one else was looking at the Uchiha. It's cool, she continued to press her point. You can save on dye. Kakuzu automatically looked up at the last word and... Oh, you, the old curmudgeon fell under the effect of the technique. Itachi had to remove the Sharingan. So red hair? Pain muttered thoughtfully. Well, it looks like the girl could be useful. She's practically immune to genjutsu. He finally gave his verdict. Karina was allowed to stay for a trial period of 1 week. That was how long it took for the artifact to recharge. And then she would be sent back to her world. And give me the medallion, the leader ordered. Yes, of course, Karina would never dare to contradict Pain when he was in such a mood. She reached into her pocket for the medallion, but... He changed shape. What is this? Pain growled menacingly. He thought it was all a bad joke. I don't, the girl felt her knees shaking. Her tongue began to slur. This is the artifact, Itachi added, scanning the medallion with his Sharingan. In Karina's palm lay an unremarkable pendant, but from it emanated energy identical to that which the Uchiha noticed from the 4 elements medallion. You may go, the leader allowed, taking the artifact from the girl. The Akatsuki began to disperse. In the office, besides its owner, 3 remained, Konan, Karina, and Sasori. What should I do now? Karina was currently a guest at the base, and she was not at all happy about provoking the owner's anger by doing something wrong. I want to take her as a student, Sasori said. Even if she can't handle the puppets, she'll be able to make poisons. Pain nodded in agreement. And Karina even blushed with pleasure. Sasori would teach her his tricks. And I have to spend the night, the girl suddenly realized. She couldn't spend the night with her future mentor. He was a guy, even if he was wooden. And she had been brought up a little differently. Even though she trusted Sasori. Today you will stay in Konan's room, and tomorrow you will prepare your bedroom, the leader allowed. And find some of your things for the guest. This was already addressed to Konan. So that I never see her in this cloak again. Everyone was blown away. No one wanted to fall under the hot hand of the owner of the Rinnegan. What's wrong with the cloak? The girl asked Konan on the way to their room. Sasori had managed to run off to his workshop. This is the Akatsuki uniform, the origami mistress explained. But we'll quickly find you clothes to suit your taste, she assured her guest. Did I do something to displease Pain? Kaori, I'll call her that since she's staying in the shinobi world for a while, decided to clarify the situation. He's kind of creepy today. Don't worry about it. You just appeared out of nowhere. Or sawdust, you'll get that faster from Sasori. The girls laughed at the joke. The atmosphere lightened. You were a surprise to me too, by the way, Kaori noted. It's different here, Konan sighed. You know we're criminals. We're constantly being hunted. And we've had to leave our hideouts in a hurry more than once. And you're not used to that. At least not yet. So, the leader is worried about me? He worries about each of us, the kunoichi explained. So they reached Conan's room. An hour later the girls were heading to the kitchen. They had to feed these idiots something. By that time Kaori had managed to change her clothes and take a shower. Dinner was prepared quickly, and Kaori was about to go inspect her room when an explosion was heard from the street. Deidara's training again, the blue-haired kunoichi was indignant. Of course, the demolition man didn't know how to behave quietly, and each of his training sessions increased the chances of their hideout being exposed. Kaori's eyes lit up. Can I see it? Yes, please. This one loves it when people look at his art, Conan waved her hand. But she still led her guest out into the yard. And many had already gathered there. After many days of forced idleness, they had missed their technicians. Kaori-chan, the fair-haired troublemaker, was delighted to see her. Now I'll show you my art. Then several things happened at once. First, from above, where Deidara was flying on a huge bird, his favorite cats, was heard. Second, a split second before that, someone nearby shouted, "Get down!" Well, and third, someone's body covered the girl, knocking her down and pinning her to the ground. The roar made their ears pop. Soon everyone started to get up from the ground, cursing the demolition man like crazy. Kaori was also helped up. As far as the girl understood from the discordant chorus of voices, Day had detonated his creation too low. Only two questions were spinning in Kaori's head. What kind of madhouse had she ended up in, and what else could happen? It's good that you came out on your own, Itachi said, as if answering her last question. Leader Sama asked me to test your abilities today. How? The girl didn't understand. You already know that there are 3 directions of action for shinobi: Jinjutsu, Taijutsu, and Ninjutsu. Yes, Sasori told me, Kaori nodded. So, you're almost insensitive to the first one, Itachi continued to explain. The 2 most powerful types of Jinjutsu were tested on you, Manjikyu Sharingan and Rinnegan. And instead of getting into a world that I completely control, you saw. How did you change your hair color? The girl picked up. So it was just an illusion? Kaori said disappointedly. A deadly illusion. Uchiha seemed upset that his technique was underestimated. So you wanted to kill me? My heart trembled, and fear made me behave defiantly. I didn't want to, Itachi objected, but I could. Will you teach me this Sharingan? The girl decided. No. Why? Kaori kept thinking whether to be offended by the guy or not. This is an innate ability of the Uchiha clan. It is passed down through generations and cannot be taught to an outsider. Okay then, the girl agreed with a refusal. It wasn't meant to be, then. Let's get started with the check, Itachi didn't delay. Okay. What should I do? Kaori herself was eager to find out her capabilities. Just stand still. At that very moment, something shiny flew towards her. The kunai grazed her forearm, barely touching her skin, and flew on. That means you can be hurt with a weapon, Uchiha concluded. Damn. It hurts, Kaori was indignant, trying to stop the thin stream of blood. Now it's my turn, Heiden's voice was heard from behind. Turning to face him, the girl could not believe her eyes. The fanatic looked like death. And he was standing in a ritual circle. In his hand was clutching a familiar kunai, from which her blood was still dripping. No one had time to react, and the faith-obsessed Zayasen drove the weapon into his chest, aiming straight at the heart. Kaori squealed in surprise. The others showed their feelings much more violently. Curses and 3-story swear words were heard from all sides. For some reason, they were cursing Haiden, and for that mattered Zayasen. Only after a few seconds did everyone deign to pay attention to the girl who didn't understand anything. Silence fell. Everyone looked at Kaori, who was safe and sound, with surprise. Idiot, Kakuzu pushed his partner out of the circle. The next second, Samahata separated the fanatic's head from his body. What don't you like? The head was indignant. So Itachi can, but I can't. The girl felt like she was going crazy. She had never even dreamed of talking heads in her nightmares. What if the girl had died? Kakuzu exploded. Kaori couldn't understand what was happening. What did she have to do with it? After all, Haydn hadn't laid a finger on her. When she was told about the details of the ritual, the girl suddenly felt worse. She liked this world less and less. She wanted to plunge headlong into the routine of her previous life. And the coming week seemed like a punishment from heaven. Consciousness was slowly but inevitably leaving the guest from another world. The morning greeted the girl with bright colors and sunlight from the uncovered window. Muska, shoot. Kaori shrugged it off rather out of habit. And you look better without pajamas, yes. Karina even jumped up on the bed in surprise. Day. That blonde misunderstanding again. Get out of my bed. The girl suddenly came to her senses. Not even noticing that she was sleeping in someone else's. The blonde obediently got out of bed, but did not take another step, watching the girl. What are you even doing here? Conan asked me to wake her up, the alarm clock snorted. Conan? The girl's memory slowly but surely began to return. And with it came memories of yesterday's check. She wanted to howl, but Kaori held back. She looked at the sunlit window. Maybe it wasn't that bad? Let's go. Deidara didn't let up. Breakfast is ready. We're just waiting for you. Yes. Yeah, the girl agreed, getting ready to get up, but then she noticed that the only clothing she had on was the sheet she was covered with. Get out of the room, the enraged girl's scream echoed throughout the shelter. A minute later a whirlwind burst into the kitchen, in which it was difficult to distinguish where the bomber ended and the girl attempting to harm his health began. If necessary, Kaori knew how to dress very quickly. Dana, save me, Day moaned, hiding behind his partner. Conan, tell that crazy woman that you were the one who undressed her yesterday, the hapless blonde begged. She's going to kill me. The demolition man was saved from death by his broad chest. Kaori, you only have 15 minutes to eat and get ready for class. With these words Sasori left. I'd hurry up if I were you, Deidara put in his 2 cents. Sasori, no, Dana hates waiting. And I already am. Just a few seconds, and Kaori is already rushing to Sasori's workshop. She can't wait to learn his tricks with puppets. The girl holds a huge sandwich in her hands, from which she bites off a large piece with appetite. Of course, she wants to, but she wants to start training even more. All her fears have blown away like the wind. However, after a couple of minutes, Kaori had to return to the kitchen. I got lost, the girl admitted. Day kindly agreed to take her, and within a couple of minutes Kaori was standing in front of the puppet master's door. A knock on the door. A creak. The door opens and the girl finds herself in a room that is already familiar to her. Sasori, she thinks about what she should call the puppeteer now. Come in. Why are you silent? I'm not sure what I should call you now. The transition to you went smoothly. Mentor or teacher? Or something else? Sensei. From today on, I will be your sensei, the shinobi decided. You can call me Sasori sensei. Sasori sensei. The girl repeated obediently. Well, that sounds good. What are we going to do today? Let's try using your chakra, Sasori explained. Kaori knew approximately what chakra was. So she simply nodded and prepared to diligently follow all of Sensei's instructions. A couple of hours later, Kaori, exhausted beyond belief, fell to the floor. Sasori, on the other hand, remained outwardly unperturbed. Although he couldn't help but be upset by the zero result of the training. And after all, Kaori hadn't moved from the dead point in all that time. The chance to learn tricks, or, as Sasori called it, jutsu, with puppets seemed increasingly illusory. Finally, the puppeteer got tired of torturing her and himself, so he invited the student to sit next to him at the table. The second part of the training began. Poisons. Akasuna no Sasori was not only a master of puppet combat, but also an expert in the preparation of poisons and antidotes to them. And he hoped that his student would succeed in this at least. And so it happened. From the very first seconds, Sasori's story about poisons captivated the girl. At school, she always had excellent grades, both in chemistry and biology. Finally, this knowledge came in handy. Occasionally, Kaori noticed that in some places her knowledge was even deeper than that of her sensei. which could not but please the latter. His student grasped everything on the fly, and he himself had the opportunity to supplement his knowledge. After a few more hours, which flew by unnoticed, thanks to her favorite activity, and studying poisons had already become such for Kaori, the girl finally left the sensei's workshop. The rumbling in her empty stomach told her that the first thing she needed to do was visit the kitchen. Turning in the already familiar corridors, Kaori soon got to where she was going, although she did take a wrong turn once. Without thinking twice, the girl made another sandwich and went to tidy up her room. Luckily, it was right next to the kitchen. Then I'll go in and have a proper snack, the girl decided. But as soon as she saw her future home, she wanted to move in with Conan for good. There was a lot of work to do. Kaori spent over an hour clearing a place for herself to spend the night, but the work done did not amount to even a tenth of the entire disaster. Already barely dragging her feet, the girl headed for the kitchen again, remembering with horror that she still had to independently practice chakra control today. Haydn was sitting in the kitchen, his back to the entrance. He did not pay attention to the girl's greeting. Kaori herself had neither the strength nor the desire to communicate. More than anything in the world, she wanted to eat normally and have a good rest. Her whole body ached from being unaccustomed to it. However, when she opened the pot of food, Kaori was in for a huge disappointment: sushi. The girl hated fish. It seemed she would have to cook it herself. But not today. Today she was too tired. Haydn, is there anything else besides sushi? Silence. Am I being ignored? Kaori couldn't stand this. It would have been fine if it had been Itachi or Zetsu. Still, it wouldn't have been so bad. But it wasn't like Haydn. And hunger added to the irritation. Haydn! The girl screamed almost in her ear. Almost no reaction. And then she heard an extraneous noise, which she had not paid attention to before. Sharply turning her interlocutor to face her, Kaori noticed headphones in his ears. What are we listening to? Deceptively soft intonations. Oh, nothing, the fanatic remembered. A quiet click and the music stopped being heard. But the girl already had a bad suspicion. So, is there anything to eat besides sushi? She decided to temporarily change the subject. But a negative shake of the head was like a death sentence. No, that's not right, the girl muttered under her breath, making another sandwich. At home, she could eat nothing but sandwiches, cookies and tea for a week straight. But there was no such strain on the body. While cutting slices of cheese and sausage, Kaori hummed a familiar tune. Then she began to whisper the words to her favorite song. I was born at night at the hour of the wolf's prayer. In the dark lair of beasts. The black angel of hell was next to me. In the circles of human passions. I walked through the flames, I was fire and stone. The worm was among the dead bodies. My name was called unclean Antichrist. You are Christ, you are on the cross. Without you I am a ghost banished from the temple. Without me you are a boring myth. You and I are like brothers in hymns and curses. With eternal power over people. But you hide a secret in your crystal soul. I know there is a mortal sin. I am not the one who will give out, my name is Antichrist. You, Christ, your cross is heavy, cross. You were baptized with blood, not river water. In the first year of earthly destiny. The king tormented the babies, and the heart exploded. Hearing a mournful female howl. The king was looking for Jesus to kill him skillfully. But you were saved by God. He began his path to glory across the bloody sands. You, Christ, are great, your throne. For millions you are innocent, but my father is Satan. But the fallen angel was equal to God, I will avenge him. But we will settle accounts, we will meet in battle in the year of the bitterest star. I know, I'll probably collapse first, and then you'll die too. My name is Antichrist, my sign is the number 666. My name is Antichrist, weep for your soul. At some point, Haydn started singing along. That was the last straw. And here's the proof. The sandwich was safely forgotten. You stole my MP3. The girl screamed, attacking the fanatic. Where did the strength come from? I didn't take anything, the shinobi tried to object, deftly dodging the guest's small fists. But who would listen to him? Kaori needed to let off steam, and here was such an opportunity. Fortunately, there was a reason. "Oh, you half-baked kleptomaniac." With a similar cry, two people came tumbling out into the fresh air, an enraged girl and a fanatic with a scratched face. But there was no point in trying to dodge when the girl rightfully wants to get her property back. "Leave me alone, you madwoman," Haydn was indignant. "No. I won't leave you alone until you give me back my MP3. What makes you think he's yours?" The blonde man didn't understand. "My music is there. My playlist." What?" The follower of the faith of Xiaosin was completely confused. Intercepting the girl's fist, and putting her hands behind her back. "Well, the songs that are playing on the player. I put them there," Kaori explained, gradually calming down. "And anyway, let go immediately. I am the injured party here." "And I thought they were all the same," Haydn said, embarrassed. "No, just listen, embarrassed." "You're in trouble, buddy," a mocking voice was heard. Kakuzu was clearly amused by this situation. "Where is my computer?" The angry girl immediately switched. "Are you Class S criminals, or petty thieves? And why did I even get involved with you?" Kaori's indignation resulted in a new attack. This time on the financier. Haydn deliberately let go of this miracle, blazing with righteous anger. However, he did not get to enjoy the spectacle. Without thinking twice, Kakuzu simply swaddled the girl in threads. "I need him," the financier said. "You're getting cheeky," Kaori sighed, trying to get out, but the threads didn't give her a chance. And yet, despite the fact that the girl had already become familiar with the power of Akatsuki, she was not afraid of them at all. And she did not feel threatened by them. He and Kakuzu would have continued arguing for a long time if they had not been interrupted by the pagan's sarcastic laughter. "And you also say that I'm stupid." Oh, he shouldn't have said that. Kaori felt herself thrown to the side, and the grip first weakened. And then completely disappeared. At least the landing was soft. But there was no time to think about it. Now an interesting spectacle opened up before the girl. The partners began to fight. Kakuzu attacked the immortal with threads, and he deftly dodged, not forgetting to counterattack from time to time. His scythe kept flashing. 3 blades drew intricate deadly patterns. But this did not stop his opponent. Quite the opposite. Their movements became faster and faster, and after 5 minutes Kaori could discern only washed-out strokes and vibrations in the air when the shinobi approached her too closely. The spectacle was mesmerizing. The girl had never seen anything more beautiful than this duel. And yet she felt that these two were fighting without the desire to kill. It was training, a friendly sparring. To confirm her guess, I can say that Kakuzu did not use any of his elements in the fight. However, Kaori did not even suspect this. The end of the fight was abrupt and unexpected. At some point, the shinobi got too close to the girl. Haydn's careless swing almost cost Kaori her life. Kakuzu stopped the blade of his scythe just a few centimeters from her face. Both sparring partners were breathing heavily after the fast-paced fight. Fear was visible in the immortal's eyes. He saw that if it weren't for his partner, he wouldn't have been able to deflect the trajectory of the blow, no matter how much he wanted to. But the girl wasn't scared at all. She was absolutely sure that they wouldn't harm her. "Great," Kaori breathed out. How had she not noticed that she had managed to hold her breath while watching the fight? "Yeah, right," Haydn didn't share her delight. "Will you teach me?" Kaori figured out that using a cold weapon does not require chakra. Which means she has a chance to succeed in this. After all, she really did not want to return to her world. "Unlikely," Kakuzu cooled her ardor. "Neither I nor this one," he nodded towards Haydn, "use standard weapons. But we have one specialist," Haydn consoled the girl, seeing that she was barely holding back tears of disappointment. "Ask Itachi." Kaori beamed. "But not today. He and Kisame are not at the base right now." Even this news did not upset Kaori. She would still make up for lost time. With such thoughts the girl returned back. Haydn kindly agreed to accompany her. "I take it you won't give me the player?" The injured party decided to clarify the situation, approaching the door of her room. "I wouldn't even think about it," her companion said smugly. Then I think I know how you'll repay me for it, the girl's voice sounded triumphant. Her eyes shone with cunning. How she didn't want to get up early in the morning. But you will have to. Laziness overcame hunger. She hadn't had dinner yesterday. Common sense told her she'd better get up and start cooking something edible, otherwise she'd be left without breakfast. Kaori jumped out of bed, swayed, and fell back into it. She hadn't slept much, and now her head was spinning from the sudden movements. Getting out of bed, this time carefully, and stumbling at every step, her eyes were so sticky that she had to walk with them closed, the girl wandered into the shower. And here, great news awaited her. At this time, the shower was free. Of course, what kind of fool would get up at 4:30, when you can sleep freely until 6 or 7 in the morning and calmly get everything done? The answer suggests itself, our unfortunate heroine. The shower refreshed and invigorated her. Next in line were changing clothes and making breakfast. There were no problems with the first, especially considering that Kaori didn't really have a choice. All her clothes were left at home. And the girl didn't take more than one shift from Conan. It's good that she didn't manage to get these clothes dirty yesterday. And that was after 2 fights. But breakfast was more difficult. Cooking only for yourself is selfish and ugly. And you want to please the guys. But cooking for 10 people is more difficult, and takes longer than for 1. With such thoughts, Kaori began cooking. She did not even notice how time flew by. She was distracted from pots and pans by the people flocking to the delicious smells. Good morning, Kaori-chan. For such an address, Deidara immediately received a spoon to the forehead. After all, he asked for it. At the same time, Kaori did not take her eyes off the stove, and the spoon was hot. In response, Deidara heard an offended sniffle and someone's creaky and seemingly mechanical laughter. Kaori shuddered and turned around. It's just Sasori-sensei. A quiet sigh of relief. But her reaction did not escape Akasuna's keen gaze. The laughter abruptly stopped, giving way to the usual sullenness and seriousness. Good morning, sensei, Deidara, the girl finally remembered about politeness. Breakfast will be ready soon. Wait a couple of minutes. And again she began to fry and steam. The rest of us, those who were at the base, had already arrived by breakfast. The morning meal was noisy and cheerful. For dessert there were pancakes with sour cream. The last one made Akatsuki especially happy. During their stay with Karina, they had become addicted to this delicacy. Watching how energetically her pancakes were being consumed, a cunning plan began to form in the girl's head. Kaori walked along the familiar corridor. With every step, her good mood evaporated without a trace. There were still a few minutes left before training, and the girl delayed the moment when she would appear before sensei as long as she could. Half a night of hard training before going to bed hadn't yielded much results. She had, of course, found a way to use chakra, but her supply was so small that it wouldn't have been enough for even a basic jutsu. But time was running out, and Sasori's workshop was getting closer. Finally, the girl had to knock and, having waited for an invitation, enter. After hearing the report on the work done, Sasori only nodded. It was still better than 0 results. The training was difficult, exhausting, but very interesting. At first, sensei taught Kaori how to properly distribute chakra throughout her body. As a result, the amount of chakra available to the girl increased, although it was still catastrophically small. Then, Kaori had to make every effort to transform chakra into chakra threads. It was difficult, but it worked. It was even more difficult to learn how to attach chakra threads to objects and move them. The latter never worked, no matter how hard Kaori tried. But with poisons things were much better. Despite the fatigue after the first part of the training, the girl listened with pleasure to the sensei's lecture on the next poison, dutifully taking notes of his words. Having said goodbye to the sensei and given him a solemn promise to train independently, Kaori crawled out of the workshop, remembering with horror that there was still cleaning to do today. A malicious grin appeared on the girl's sweet face. At least she wouldn't have to suffer alone. As if in response to her thoughts, a choice swear word was heard from the living room. Here's the victim. Even too, the girl decided, entering the room where the immortal partners were arguing. At the same time, Kakuzu was trying to type something on the computer, and Haydn was actively interfering with him. Here's my laptop. Kaori exclaimed happily. The argument immediately stopped. You won't get it, the financier interrupted her. Then pay up, the girl retorted, putting her hands on her hips and looming over the waterfall's apostate. Kaori knew perfectly well that she was right. That meant she could turn to the leader for support. And the newly minted programmer wouldn't argue with pain. And Kakuzu knew all of this, too. But the money? No, the old curmudgeon shook his head, clutching the laptop to his chest. Then I know how you can pay, she smiled from ear to ear. You'll help Haydn, the girl explained. Now both of you, follow me. For once Kaori felt like the mistress of the situation. She could command these two, which she was going to use to her own advantage in the near future. I can't take this kind of abuse anymore, the fanatic complained to his partner late at night, wandering towards his room. Kaori had only deigned to let them go 2 minutes ago, assuring them that they were now even. That's all we'll have to do, Kakuzu objected. We bought that harpy off, though the financier himself had to agree to occasionally give up the computer to its former owner. The hacker himself looked no better than his partner. And he moved just as hard. And all because of the assignment from this crazy woman. She was too lazy, you see, to clean the room herself. She had harnessed the debtors. And from lunch until late at night, these two hapless thieves of other people's property cleared away the rubble and dragged heavy things from the room to the outside and vice versa. Unaccustomed to it, all their muscles ached, their bones ached, and their heads split. And they didn't even want to remember that a mission awaited them the next day, right after breakfast. You know, Kakuzu, I finally realized how lucky I am with my partner, the pagan remarked sarcastically. Really? Yeah. If you weren't such a cheapskate, I'd have to clean this all up by myself. Haydn laughed in his usual manner, but immediately doubled over from a sharp pain in his abdominal muscles. And Kakuzu added a slap on the back of the head. Itachi and Kisame were supposed to return from their mission today. With such thoughts, the girl got up early to have time to prepare breakfast for the Akatsuki. By silent agreement, it was decided that Kaori would be the only one doing the cooking. I wonder if these two will make it in time for dinner, the girl thought, setting out the cutlery. Good morning. Here come the first swallows, the girl decided, turning around to say hello too. We made it. In time for breakfast. Uchiha stood at the threshold of the kitchen, and his partner towered behind him. Itachi-kun. The girl immediately hung on his neck. And the owner of the Sharingan shuddered from such an address. Of course, at one time, fans bothered him even more than they later did Sasuke. The nervous tremors at phrases like Itachi-kun did not go away even after many years. Will you teach me how to fight? The girl continued in the meantime. Now? Itachi was surprised. He had not yet moved away from Kun. Oh. Itachi, Kisame, the girl came to her senses, switching to her usual manner of speech and again ignoring all the suffixes. Good morning. Come in. Breakfast is already on the table. Soon the rest of the organization members came to the kitchen, including the gloomy, sleep-deprived Haydn and Kakuzu. Only Sasori was missing. But the puppeteer often ignored breakfast. Kaori-chan, you don't need to hurry anywhere, Deidara interrupted the lively conversation, pointing to the time. Oh. Was all the girl managed to squeak, jumping up from the table. Sasori-sensei would kill her if she was late again. Or even worse, he wouldn't teach her how to make puppets. I'll come see you later, Itachi. Came from the depths of the corridor. Haydn looked at Uchiha sympathetically. Poor Sharingan genius. Who else but the fanatic would know what it meant to be alone with their guest for more than an hour? Yesterday, this brat drove him and his partner so hard that all their muscles still ached. But now the player was legally his. The fanatic immediately put the headphones in his ears and completely forgot about Uchiha. It was not in his habit to feel sorry for someone for long. And who came up with this brilliant idea to foist a student on me? Itachi's voice clearly contained a threat. The looks of the criminals gathered in the kitchen immediately gave away the culprit. It's time for us to go on a mission, Kakuzu suddenly realized, wrapping his partner in threads and at the last moment pulling the music lover out from under the blow. The chair, on which the worshipper of the bloody god Zayasen had recently been sitting, burst into flames, having experienced the power of one of the fire techniques of the representative of the Sharingan clan. She really twisted the sentence. Kakuzu, no fool, had long ago slipped away from the shelter, taking his partner with him. Haiden would never get even with him. Kaori runs into Sensei's workshop. She made it. There were even a few seconds left. Sasori looks up at her and frowns. Here we go again. What is he unhappy with this time? Why without knocking? The girl knocked on the already closed door automatically. The expression in the sensei's eyes should have been seen. Well, Akasuna no Sasori was not used to such impudent and familiar treatment. The girl would have to do something supernatural to make him change his mind about killing her. Apparently, the shinobi's thoughts were quite clearly reflected on his face, because Kaori quickly blurted out. I was able to move the cup with chakra threads. It will do. For his student, something like this was truly akin to a miracle. What the Red Sand Scorpion himself learned in a few minutes, his student took 2 days. But things moved forward. And difficulties never scared him. Once again, Sasori decided that he would make a puppet master out of his student. Okay. Today I'm in a good mood and I forgive you. But next time I'll just poison you. Kaori swallowed, but still forced herself to smile. Come in. Take the tools and remember, Sensei changed the subject. Then Kaori listened to Sasori-sensei for a long time, trying to create her first puppet. Oddly enough, she succeeded. The girl's first puppet did not have weapons. It resembled a human figure, but only in general terms. The doll did not inspire either sympathy or disgust. It had no hair, no clothes, no face. But Kaori understood the basics of assembling puppets. With her, she would learn to control dolls. Sasori explained what to do to make the puppet start moving, but the girl did not have time to practice. Time was running out, and they still had to disassemble one interesting poison. Therefore, everything else was assigned as homework. Having said goodbye to her sensei, Kaori rushed to find Itachi. She found him in the living room and immediately began to persuade the Uchiha to teach her how to fight. The shinobi quickly realized that it was easier to agree than to continue trying to ignore the clingy girl. Especially since Kaori hated being ignored. So doing this was becoming problematic. So then, Sensei number 2 began his lecture. True, he and Itachi had agreed that they would continue to address each other by name. Now I will show you some of what I will teach you. Itachi hadn't even finished his sentence, and his kunai was already flying towards the target, a tree growing nearby. Several shurikens and senbons followed. And all of this at great speed. Literally, in one jump. And you'll have to learn all of this as well, Uchiha continued to say. I'll make sure you give it your all during our training. At these words, a suspicion crept into the girl's pretty head that she had gone completely crazy when she decided to ask Itachi for help. Taijutsu is one of the main paths of ninja development. Along with ninjutsu and genjutsu, Itachi continued, not stopping for a second and sending more and more projectiles at the target. But in addition to the possession of cold weapons, taijutsu also involves the use of hand-to-hand combat. Now the brunette did not throw the weapon, but held the kunai in his hand and pretended to fight. The way he arched, lunged, and what he did in the jump amazed the girl no less than the speed with which Itachi moved. And I can do something like that. Kaori's eyes were still filled with lightning-fast somersaults and flips. The girl was very doubtful that she would receive a positive answer. You can, Uchiha surprised her. But it's almost impossible to gain the same speed without the Sharingan. There are only a few shinobi in the world who are capable of this. I see. Kaori pretended to be imbued with the situation, although there were still a lot of unanswered questions for her. However, the girl did not ask them, deciding that with time she would figure everything out. Then, to the horror of his new student, Itachi forced her to undergo an unscheduled training session. A cross-country race of several kilometers. She had to quickly recall her physical education lessons at school. After the cross-country race, she began practicing strikes and dodges. Kaori said goodbye to her tormentor long after it had gotten dark. She could barely move her legs, but the satisfied smile did not leave her face. If Uchiha had hoped that after today she would get scared and back down, he was very much mistaken. Kaori could be stubborn. And these training sessions would bring her one step closer to her cherished goal. The girl dreamed of staying in this world, and she would do everything possible and impossible to achieve this. Moreover, she was doing quite well at it. The girl crawled into the room with a vague suspicion that she had forgotten something important. Sleeping only 3 hours a day is harmful to the body. Especially for the body of a novice shinobi, especially for the body of a novice kunoichi, especially for the body of a novice kunoichi whose sensei is the scorpion of the Red Sands himself. But who would have thought that controlling a puppet would be such an exciting experience? Spending the whole night training and only coming to your senses when you get hit in the forehead by your own puppet. Only Kaori can do that. And all because she fell asleep during training and lost control of her chakra. I didn't want to move at all. What had caused discomfort yesterday due to muscle fatigue today gave off a sharp pain throughout my entire body. The body, unaccustomed to such loads, protested against such abuse. Having gotten up through "I don't want to" and having taken a cold shower to at least come to her senses a little, the girl dragged herself to the kitchen to cook breakfast for these gluttons. Since the morning, Kaori could not call the criminals who had sheltered her anything else. Especially if she had to get up early in the morning and go to hard labor at the stove. All normal people are still asleep, the unfortunate woman lamented. Even those crazy Akatsuki are still asleep. And you, Kaori, go make them breakfast. However, soon the girl finally woke up, perked up, and no longer resembled the sleepy chicken she had been just half an hour ago. Her mood rose, and Kaori even began to hum something from her favorite aria. The thought came to her that a player would not hurt. The mood was spoiled by the first visitor to the kitchen. Itachi was sullen, taciturn, but worse, he had every right to spoil Kaori's mood. How could she forget about her morning run? Now Uchiha would definitely torture her during training. Her hands involuntarily began to tremble. It was good that the girl was already finishing frying pancakes, and they had become a mandatory component of breakfasts, as the cornerstone of Kaori's strategy. The rest of the dishes were already waiting for the eaters on the table. "I'll work off the pass," the girl promised, realizing that she was signing her death warrant. Luckily, the rest of the organization began to gather in the kitchen, which gave Kaori the opportunity to forget about the problem for a while. Kaori flew down the hallway, cursing the minute she decided to wash the dishes after breakfast. Why did she need to do that? As if the world would collapse over a few dirty dishes. Now she's definitely going to get it in the neck. Sasori doesn't like to wait. The girl has learned this by heart. So why is she late for training again? Throwing open the doors, again without knocking, Kaori miscalculated her strength and flew nose down. That's what saved her. A silvery streak of metal. A slight pain. Her hand automatically clamped the scratch and a few drops of blood stained the sleeve of her turtleneck. "I don't like waiting," a quiet, calm voice. Not a hint of irritation. A simple statement of fact. Then why? Sasori-sensei, the hapless student began, but she was interrupted. "You have 2 hours to prepare the antidote. That kunai was poisoned. I'll give you a hint for the first time, it's the poison we analyzed yesterday." And that was it. There was no more hint to be expected from sensei. Kaori had the entire laboratory of the poison master at her disposal. But she would have to prepare the antidote herself. And she would have to do it with extreme caution. One wrong ingredient and not only would the poison not be neutralized, but she might even create a new poison, and it was not a fact that even sensei would be able to save her then. Yes, an original way to check homework and consolidate the material covered. Half of the allotted time had already passed. And Kaori was haunted by failure after failure. No, she remembered the recipe perfectly. But excitement and lack of experience played their role. Either her hand would slip and the powder would spill, or the water would overheat. The muscles gradually began to go numb. Another hour and she would not be able to move, and then the poison would reach the heart muscle and death. Sasori had been busy with one of his puppets all this time and did not bother the girl. She felt terribly offended by his indifference. She wanted to drop everything and run away from this cold man. But she wanted to live much more. Therefore, Kaori pushed her resentment far away and began a new attempt. She succeeded. The test showed that the antidote was prepared correctly and neutralized the poison. A triumphant smile was about to appear on the girl's face, but she realized with horror that her facial muscles no longer obeyed her. And that meant that she was too late after all. She wanted to scream, but that didn't work either. The last thing that came to mind was that she would at least lose consciousness and not feel pain. At the last moment, the unconscious body was caught by caring hands. With one habitual movement, the shinobi injected the antidote the girl had just prepared. Well, she made it in time. Even if it was at the last moment. Even if she had a few extra minutes because of the minor cut. Sasori had been keeping a close eye on his protégé all this time, although he didn't show it. That's why he was 100% sure that the antidote had been prepared correctly. The girl had pleasantly surprised him. For a newbie, she had worked more than well. Most people wouldn't have been able to do it, and she was also poisoned. Well, at least his student was making progress in something. Kaori woke up surprisingly quickly. In just a few minutes, Sensei immediately injected her with something that removed the unpleasant effects of the poison. He restrainedly praised her for her progress and immediately made her clean up her workplace, where Kaori had managed to turn everything upside down. When working with poisons and other chemicals, priorities were set on order and accuracy. Otherwise, you can cause such trouble that you won't be able to clean up the consequences in a year. If, of course, there is someone to clean up these very consequences. Then there was a lecture on another fairly common poison. And when Sasori began to explain to the student the principle of analyzing an unknown poison, the girl realized that she was in deep trouble. Next time, Sensei would not say what kind of poison he had poisoned her with. She would have to figure it out herself. And then prepare an antidote. And yet he did not leave her alone. At a critical moment, Sasori helped and pulled the student almost from the other world. And this gave hope that in the future he would not let her die either. Against her will, a happy smile appeared on the girl's face. I said something funny, the puppeteer interrupted Kaori's thoughts, bringing her back down to earth. No, it's not funny at all. I just remembered that I never thanked you for your help, the girl admitted. No need. You did it all yourself. It was clear that Sasori was not used to hearing words of gratitude. And yet, I owe you my life. The fact that it was with Sasori's easy encouragement that she almost said goodbye to this light somehow flew out of Kaori's pretty head. How can I thank you? Show me what you were able to achieve from the puppet, Akasuna compromised. Kaori beamed. She had something to brag about. But the smile disappeared immediately. The girl remembered that she had forgotten the doll in her room. I had to run after her. It was not safe to give a combat puppet, filled to the brim with deadly weapons, into the hands, chakra threads, of an untrained girl, and Sasori did not hold any others. If not him, then herself. It is not for nothing that they say that the most dangerous weapon in the world is the one held by a woman. While Kaori was running after the puppet, her sensei made a note that it wouldn't hurt to teach her how to use the sealing scrolls. He did so after the girl demonstrated her success. In a seemingly simple matter, such as sealing and summoning puppets, there were also problems. The trouble was that Kaori could neither write nor read Japanese. Yes, she spoke the shinobi language perfectly and understood them without effort. But only in spoken speech. Their writing was a dark forest for the girl. Having barely memorized the few hieroglyphs needed for the summoning, Kaori sighed with relief, but it was not to be. Sasori gave her a special assignment to learn the grammar of their language, warning that in the future she would need it more than once. If I stay in this world, the girl thought with annoyance. But she still nodded, agreeing. However, Sasori-sensei himself refused to teach her the language, citing a lack of time and being busy with missions. However, he advised her who would be best to turn to. I brazenly stole the quote from a Balianin. Itachi is a beast. Kaori realized this sharply and clearly while she was running another cross-country race. The pain, which had dulled, made itself known again. Running another kilometer, the girl cursed her tormentor with all her might. At the same time, she thanked the heavens that Itachi could not read her thoughts, no matter how much he wanted to. The fact that Itachi was always nearby during the run did not reduce the suffering of the unfortunate woman in the least. For him, this was all familiar and not at all difficult. After the light jog came the warm-up. That's when Kaori realized how right she was when she decided not to give up sports completely and now had a pretty good stretch. As it turned out, her stretching wasn't that great. What Itachi made her do during training was something the girl had never dreamed of, even in her worst nightmare. But it came true. When Kaori fell to the ground, unable to move a single muscle, Itachi, as if nothing had happened, began a lecture on taijutsu. Taijutsu is the Japanese art of close combat without weapons, the art of maintaining a healthy body, Uchiha began to broadcast. The taijutsu system includes almost all known groups of techniques, punches and kicks, painful twists, throws, strangulations, etc., embodying the traditions of more than 1,000 years of history of the development of the art of shadow warriors. And I've already managed to test all of this on my own skin, Kaori noted sadly to herself. Taijutsu is any technique related to martial arts or the use of natural human abilities. Itachi's cold, emotionless monologue lulled the girl to sleep. In other words, taijutsu uses stamina directly, without converting it into chakra. Taijutsu techniques are much faster to use, but are not always as powerful in effect as ninjutsu or genjutsu. Hey! Are you asleep? Uchiha couldn't believe his eyes when his gaze accidentally fell on the student. This had never happened to him before. His enemies were too afraid of him, and his friends respected him, to fall asleep in the middle of his speech. Itachi rarely spoke as much as he did in this lecture. So, you woke up running, got up and went for a run. The Sharingan genius boiled over. But he was brazenly ignored. Kaori didn't even try to defend herself when the sensei started shaking her in a useless attempt to wake her up. There was no strength left even for that. Itachi sighed heavily, but finally accepted this failure and left the girl alone, mentally promising himself to get even during the next lesson. Then he covered Kaori with his cloak and went to the base, leaving the girl alone. This is how Deidara found her in the evening. Hey, sleepyhead, wake up, he called the girl quietly. But that was enough for Kaori to sit up abruptly, almost hitting her forehead with the blonde. Huh? What? Where am I? The still sleepy girl wondered. You're in the clearing. Near the base. Yes. But what are you doing here, and under the Akatsuki cloak, I should ask you, Day sneered. I fell asleep, Kaori began to vaguely recall. Probably right after training. That's why Itachi left me here. With each word spoken, the girl's tone became more and more uncertain, and by the end she was almost stuttering. Oh no. Kaori moaned. I'm a corpse. It doesn't look like it, the blonde objected. You're a fool. I fell asleep during the lecture, but now the girl's tone was full of despair. Day blinked his long eyelashes in bewilderment a couple of times, and when the meaning of what was said reached him, he laughed loudly. You're lucky, baby, he said after laughing. If Itachi didn't kill you right away, he's not going to do it later. Yeah. Although, maybe death would have been a better option for you, he muttered under his breath, so that the interlocutor wouldn't hear the last sentence. What are you doing here? The girl finally decided to find out. It was unlikely that he was specifically looking for her here. I wanted to fly. Yeah. And here you are lying. Maybe you'd like to keep me company, Day even blushed slightly from embarrassment. With pleasure. Kaori was delighted. But as soon as she realized what she had signed up for, her ardor immediately died down. However, it was too late. Day created a clay bird in a couple of seconds, enlarged it and, without any visible effort, jumped onto its back, grabbing the girl. The bird soared into the sky accompanied by a wild girl scream. Kaori was terribly afraid of heights. And the fact that she was flying on an exploding clay bird, which was controlled by a not always adequate S-class criminal, did not contribute to her mental balance. Day, I'm afraid of heights, the girl admitted, almost crying. At the same time, she clung to the pilot with all her might, glancing with one eye at the landscapes passing below. Her curiosity would definitely be her undoing someday. Just remember that I'm not a shinobi, and I can't fly, Kaori whispered, clinging to the blonde. Don't worry, it won't explode, yes, Deidara assured her, smiling from ear to ear. That doesn't make me feel any better, she sighed in response. And yet, about an hour later, the girl was lying calmly on the bird, cheerfully exchanging jokes with the demolitionist. Below, trees flashed by at great speed, making her head spin. But the girl was not afraid. Not anymore. As paradoxical as it may be for our heroine, she felt calm at a height of half a kilometer with this art mad. Although in her native world, her best friends, who had known her since she was a baby, could not make her jump even 2 meters into the water. Probably, such friends. Now the most obvious thought is that she will not find friends like Akatsuki in her home world. The girl felt easy and calm with these criminals. And not at all scared. Let's forget together the moments when Haydn almost sacrificed her, Sasori poisoned her, and her reaction to Itachi. They spent half the night on a bird racing through the dark skies. From time to time, Day made sharp turns and dives, then his companion grabbed him tightly, screaming with horror and delight. A wild mixture, but how much adrenaline. And, naturally, the pyrotechnician did not forget to introduce the girl to his art. Art is an explosion, he shouted almost into the girl's ear. The deafening sound of the explosion made Kaori flinch, although she had expected something like that. And if Day hadn't warned her, she probably would have fallen off her clay back. Beautiful, the girl agreed. But dangerous. But in my world there are fireworks. It's an even more exciting spectacle. Fireworks? Day asked, wondering what could be more beautiful than an explosion. These are small explosions. Only they are colored and do not cause destruction. But they also boom. Kaori tried to explain, but did not convince the demolition man. Boom, that's good. Yeah. But can they do it like that? Day didn't let up. Cats. Immediately, not so powerful, but still far from weak explosions were heard from all sides. A wave of heat reached the people, and Kaori hurried to hide her face on the guy's chest. I'll show you some fireworks one day, she promised, hoping with all her might that she'd get the chance to keep her promise. I'm sure you'll like it. Then they enjoyed the art for a long time and simply soared in the sky. Until Kaori fell asleep in the arms of the blonde, wrapped in the Uchiha's cloak. Chapter 4. Operation Remain in Akatsuki. Day 5. This was becoming a bad habit. It was necessary to end these 3-hour rests at night. It was clearly not a full sleep. No matter how hard Kaori tried, her eyes refused to open. The only thing that bothered her now was the excessive windiness in her room. Had she forgotten to close the window last night? It didn't seem so. Good morning, baby, came right next to my ear. Day? What did you forget in my room? The girl asked, not really interested in the answer. Right now she was much more interested in how to manage to wrap herself in a blanket more comfortably and doze off a little more. And we're not in your room, yes. We're on My Bird, right above the base, the pyrotechnician enlightened. The sleep vanished as if by magic. Kaori jumped up abruptly and would have flown down with a swing if Day had hesitated even for a second. But the shinobi was on the alert and caught the girl in time. Don't rush so much, yeah, you'll still have time to get off. What am I doing here? However, her memory slowly but surely returned her to the events of yesterday evening. I still have to run and cook today, Kaori remembered. What time is it? It's still early. But it's better not to dawdle, Day noted. You go for a run for now, and I'll help with breakfast, the blonde decided, putting the girl down on the ground at the entrance to the lair. Thank you, Day, the girl smiled happily and, having kissed the demolition man on the cheek, disappeared behind the trees. She had a half-hour run ahead of her. I'm back, Kaori announced cheerfully, entering the kitchen. And gasped. Day had managed to do 3/4 of the work. Daydara, you're gold. The guy's efforts were rewarded with another kiss. After which Kaori, without wasting any time, began to finish cooking. There were especially many pancakes today. Are you up yet? Sasori was surprised as he entered the kitchen. Good morning to you too, Dana, yeah, Daydara said cheerfully. And I didn't go to bed today. Yes. Where have you been? This was already addressed to the girl. With Day. We flew. Yes, Kaori reported, involuntarily copying her friend's manner of speech. Is that so? Then I advise you to finish breakfast quickly, Deidara. We'll be leaving soon. A sharp turn and Sasori leaves the kitchen. You have a mission? Kaori asked in surprise. How could I forget, Yes. Mission, the demolition man nodded. Then sit down and eat. And I'll pack some food for you for the journey, the girl began to command. She felt like a mistress in the kitchen. What a habit, you've got into the habit of leaving on a mission, and I don't even say a word, Kaori complained quietly. Breakfast passed without incident. Day left before the first awakened ones appeared. Wishing him luck on the mission, Kaori began washing his dishes, humming another melody from the player that had been lost to her. There was no point in rushing to training, since Sensei was not at the base anyway. And yet, she did not dare to skip training. Kaori had studied her sensei well enough, and therefore knew that he would not leave her without a task. However, this did not stop her from cleaning the kitchen and the rooms entrusted to her. The girl was right, and on the table in the workshop she found a sheet of paper with a list of tasks, among which were the creation of her own puppet, more thought out and clearly made, but without a weapon yet. Sasori promised to do this upon his return, training in sealing scrolls and learning to read and write with Kakuzu. The entire workshop was at her disposal, naturally, within reasonable limits. At the bottom was a note that the mission would take several days, but they would try to return before she returned to her home world. And I was still hoping to rest, the girl sighed, unrolling one of the scrolls left on the table in the workshop. It turned out to be drawings of puppets. Sighing again, Kaori began to sort out the drawings. Soon the girl was so absorbed in her work that she didn't even notice how time had flown. She was distracted from her own drawings, made based on those left by her sensei, by Uchiha. You didn't show up for practice, he said. Sorry, Itachi, I was too busy working in the workshop and didn't notice how time flew by. Kaori came to her senses, making the final touches on the drawing. Tomorrow we can start working. If I survive today's training, Kaori corrected herself, looking into the eyes of her taijutsu sensei. The dilated pupils showed extreme irritation. It was not for nothing that Uchiha had explained to her how important it was to be able to notice any details in a fight, including the enemy's emotions. And while others avoided looking into the eyes of the owner of the Sharingan, Kaori had nothing to fear. And the girl quickly learned to determine his mood by them. And with a teacher like Itachi, learning slowly was a health risk. Nevertheless, Kaori stood up and followed Uchiha to their training ground. Risking her health in this world was becoming a normal thing for her. The lazy man does it twice, the fool does it 3 times, but Kaori does it always. Taijutsu is a body technique. Techniques performed without weapons. During a duel between high-level taijutsu masters, the slightest movement often decides the outcome of the fight, determining victory or defeat. Even if the movement is almost perfect, one small mistake sometimes determines life or death. Uchiha continued his lecture when the girl once again failed to dodge a sweep and fell on her back, hitting her back hard. It knocked the breath out of her, and that's what didn't give her the opportunity to object, although the sharp words were just about to fly off her tongue. With such success, by the end of the week you will not advance beyond the initial level of students of the Ninja Academy. And this is very, very little. I know, the girl wheezed irritably in response. But I don't have the Sharingan to copy your movements. To be fair, it should be noted that for a 3rd lesson, Kaori was quite good, but in her case, the main thing is not the amount of training, but the end result. If only I had a couple of months to spare, Kaori sighed, rising with difficulty from the ground and taking a fighting stance. I think there's a way to buy some time, Itachi noted when the girl found herself on the ground once again. I can't promise a couple of months, but a few days of extra training will be provided. I'm in. Kaori perked up, quickly getting to her feet, although a second ago she thought she wouldn't be able to move a finger. What do you want from me? I have one illusion technique. But I need to use the Sharingan. All of Kaori's enthusiasm vanished at his words. She remembered that Itachi's eyes had no effect on her. Now it seemed more of a disadvantage than an advantage. But I think not all is lost. The Sharingan did work on you, though not as it should. If you help me, there will be every chance of catching you in an illusion. Kaori nodded vigorously and prepared to facilitate. After some time they succeeded. Everything around them changed, the colors of the surrounding world changed to red and black. Here I control everything, right down to the mass and volume of bodies. In addition, 3 days in Tsukiyomi equal a second in the real world. Thus, we can gain a lot of time. But this technique takes too much strength, and I will not be able to use it more than once a day, Itachi warned. So, let's begin. Obeying the will of the master of the world, torture devices, which people sometimes unknowingly call training machines, began to appear around. An unknown force pushed the girl to one of the training machines for practicing punches and kicks. Kaori had no choice but to get down to business. The girl held out steadfastly for the first 10 hours. Fortunately, in Tsukiyomi the fatigue was much less noticeable than in the real world. Then it became boring. The initial enthusiasm had passed, and the monotonous work was not inspiring. Itachi, however, continued to demand that she practice the same movements. And his student obeyed, mentally cursing him as much as her imagination allowed. It was convenient, after all. When your thoughts could not be read. The girl did not take into account one thing: they were now in a completely different world, where nothing was impossible for Itachi. When the trainer repeated one of her phrases word for word, Kaori first turned pale, then began to tremble noticeably, and finally almost lost consciousness. But she was not allowed to escape punishment in this way. Instead, Itachi personally began to train her. Practicing combat techniques turned into perverted torture. The girl had never received so many bruises, contusions, and abrasions in her entire life as she earned during this training. And this does not include several fractures and very serious wounds, from which, under normal circumstances, Kaori went to the next world. But not in Tsukiyomi. Itachi, maybe we shouldn't, the girl begged, seeing the sensei's determination to kill her, if not physically, then morally. We must, Fedia, we must. Itachi declared instructively with an indescribable intonation. The girl, already ready to defend herself, released the kunai from her hand and sank to the ground. Itachi, where did you manage to pick up that phrase? She asked in surprise. You called it a movie. And there was another moment, the shinobi's face changed subtly, his eyes sparkled with another idea. Itachi, you are an Akatsuki member. This is not your method. Kaori immediately pleaded, paraphrasing a quote from the same film. She did not want to experience the same re-education method that was used on the negligent worker. The Uchiha's expression did not diminish his determination one bit. That meant he would have to defend himself. His hand immediately found a kunai in the black grass. His body automatically assumed a defensive stance. His gaze focused on his opponent. Kaori did not notice the exact moment the attack began, the shinobi's movements were so fast. However, she managed to successfully parry several attacks. Then came a slight wound to her right hand, which prevented her from holding the weapon comfortably. The blood flowing from her elbow down her arm caused slight discomfort. The kunai was ready to slip out of her palm at any moment. Having deftly transferred the weapon from one hand to the other, the girl continued to defend herself. There was no talk of attacking yet. Soon the kunai was knocked out of the girl's hands. And Kaori began to fight with taijutsu techniques. However, this did not last long either. That's better, Itachi praised, pressing his student to the ground. What? The girl was indignant at her guess, so it was a bluff? You were provoking me like this? Not exactly. If you hadn't defended yourself so desperately, I would have had to teach you a lesson. In the movie, this method worked, Uchiha added calmly. Don't take everything you saw in movies seriously. Movies are fiction, the girl tried to convince him. Okay, let's move on. Let's continue training. Itachi changed the subject, and Kaori still couldn't figure out when Itachi's conversation style had changed. It seemed like he had been acting differently for a week. On the other hand, they hadn't really talked during training. Uchiha only dictated lectures to her, and Kaori cursed him in her head. But Sensei didn't give her time to think about it for long. A new duel began, and Kaori had to focus all her attention on it. And a second earlier, all her wounds, even the most insignificant ones, had disappeared. This time, Kaori held out a little longer. Itachi was pleased with her success. True, he succumbed to her too. In a real fight, the girl would not have lasted against him for even 5 seconds. By the end of the 3-day training, when the girl could barely stand on her feet from fatigue, she still managed to switch from defense to attack a couple of times. "Now, focus on increasing your physical strength," Uchiha ordered when they returned to the ordinary world. Kaori wanted to object, citing fatigue, but she noticed the warning look from her sensei and remained silent. Instead, she headed for the training pole. Kaori felt that she remembered all the techniques she had learned in the illusion, but her strength and speed had not increased, which meant that she would have to work hard to make her body keep up with her skills. By evening, the girl was already falling off her feet, but stubbornly continued to strike the log. Her knees, elbows and knuckles had long been beaten to blood. But the pain had already begun to dull, although it was still unbearable. But, despite the streams of tears that she had no strength to hold back, the girl continued training. From time to time, as a respite, she ran a large circle around the base, or began to squat/push up. As they say, the best rest is a change of activity. "I'm so tired," Kaori complained to herself, not stopping moving for a second, because she knew that if she stopped, she would fall and would not be able to get up. "I'll kiss the one who stops this torture." But looking at the condition of the coach, who was, to put it mildly, not in shape, she overcame herself and pushed her indignation far away. But here's what she didn't expect. "I'm so tired," Kaori complained to herself, not stopping moving for a second, because she knew that if she stopped, she would fall and would not be able to get up. "I'll kiss the one who stops this torture." But looking at the condition of the coach, who was, to put it mildly, not in shape, she overcame herself and pushed her indignation far away. But what she didn't expect was that literally 5 minutes later an angry, swearing, hungry pagan would appear. Edited by censorship. "Why are you chilling here when there's nothing in the kitchen?" "But Day and I only cooked a ton of food this morning," the girl protested, finally stopping and falling forward, right into Hayden's arms. Redacted. So Kisame %% and %, sometimes even censorship is powerless, ate everything, the albino said, deftly picking up Kaori. "And what are you actually doing here?" He finally drew attention to her condition. "I'm training." Kaori tried to proudly raise her chin, but her neck began to ache traitorously, crunching her vertebrae, which made the girl wince painfully. "It's obvious. It's a shame to sacrifice you to Zayasen-sama in such a state. Who is that sadist who made you abuse your own body like that?" In response, the girl nodded towards Itachi, who had recently dozed off under a tree. "Did $and $dollar do this?" The pagan was surprised. "No, of course I suspected that he was not all there, but to mock a defenseless girl like that." First of all, Kaori objected when she and the fanatic had managed to get some distance away from the sleeping Uchiha. "He didn't force me to do anything. And secondly, thanks to this training, I'm going to become not a defenseless girl, but a kunoichi. However, you're more helpless than a chicken right now. It looks like we're gonna fucking go hungry today unless Kisame makes sushi. That's all we can expect from him." "I hate sushi," the girl sighed, leaning back in Hayden's arms and relaxing. She wasn't capable of anything more right now anyway. Having brought the girl to her bedroom, Hayden laid her down more comfortably in bed, fluffed up the pillow and was about to leave. "I'll bring you some tea and cookies now. And you try not to fall asleep, damn it." Kaori nodded, doubting that she would be able to fulfill her promise. However, despite the terrible fatigue, sleep would not come. Even a cup of aromatic green tea did not improve the situation. The girl's brain continued to work despite the exhaustion of her body. She remembered the promise she had made to herself not long ago. Kaori always kept her promises, whatever they were and whoever they were addressed to. That is why she is alive now. Flashback. "Karina, my girl," a familiar, warm voice brought her out of her feverish oblivion. The girl remembered that it belonged to her aunt. But why was there so much torment in it? "How are you, sunshine?" Karina tried to answer honestly, but her dry throat and stuck-together lips did not allow her to do so. Reaching for a glass of water, the girl was surprised to notice the bandages restricting her movements, and even a cast. Memory finally began to return. The bewilderment in her gaze quickly gave way to pain, doom, and even panic. The girl remembered the car accident. She had already been informed of the death of her relatives. The aunt immediately began to console her niece, assuring her that she was not alone, that she always had somewhere to come and someone to turn to. Karina nodded, but she could not hold back her tears of despair. "Promise me that you won't give up and that you will fight for your life to the end," the aunt demanded before leaving. "I promise," the girl assured her. She would fight to the end, no matter how hard it was. And not only for herself, but for her family. They had lost loved ones, too. There was no point in upsetting them even more. And Karina fought. She did not give up even after they stopped injecting her with painkillers because of an allergy. She was able to survive not only the mental trauma, but also the wild physical pain. End of flashback. "I still have to keep my promise, because this is my ninja path." She came to this conclusion unexpectedly easily, but she realized that it was absolutely true. "Haydn, can I have you?" The albino was still in her room, looking after the cripple. The guy approached her, but Kaori gestured for him to bend down. The girl was about to kiss him on the cheek, but Haydn, not expecting anything like that, turned his face at the wrong time, or, on the contrary, very well in time, and the kiss landed right on the lips. "Thank you for saving me from that hard labor," the girl whispered in his ear, embarrassed and blushing. "Please," Haydn was so surprised that he even forgot about swearing. "I wouldn't mind saving you more often, if—" "Oh no. Once is enough for you," the indignant and extremely embarrassed girl interrupted him. "And anyway, it's time for me to sleep. I have to get up early tomorrow. There's just not a wink of sleep in either eye." "Haydn," the call stopped the white-haired man already at the door. "Please stay until I fall asleep." The pagan nodded and settled down at the head of her bed, squeezing the girl's hand. The acute feeling of loneliness that had rolled in a few seconds ago began to gradually recede. It became warm and cozy. "Thank you," Kaori whispered, closing her eyes and focusing all her attention on the man sitting next to her. After all, it was easy and calm to be with him. Especially when he didn't swear. There he sits now, silent. So sweet. Half an hour later, Kaori gave in and opened her eyes. She still didn't feel like sleeping. It was relatively early, relative to her previous nights. Squeezing the shinobi's hand tighter, thus drawing attention to herself. "I can't sleep," the girl complained. "What the fuck do I have to do with it?" The pagan was indignant. "Well, I opened my mouth and all the charm went down the drain." "Call Kakuzu," the girl finally decided. "And let him take his laptop with him." Haydn stood up and left the room. Kaori immediately felt abandoned and unwanted. She couldn't be alone tonight. Fortunately, a dissatisfied financier soon arrived. "Good evening, Kakuzu," the girl greeted him politely. In response, only a disgruntled grumble. "Sorry, but I need to work on the computer." "I won't be long, just a couple of hours." "A couple of hours?" Kakuzu was horrified. "This is impossible. I have to work. I can't waste time. Time is money." "For some reason, I had no doubt that everything would come down to this," Kaori sighed. "But I really need to work. Could you reconfigure the laptop to Russian for a while?" "Reconfigure for a short time? The setup alone will take half an hour?" "No, that won't do." "Then teach me your language." "And you won't have to change languages every time," the girl suggested with an innocent look, although she started the whole dialogue precisely for this phrase. And now all that was left was to wait for an answer. "So, you flew all night?" the puppeteer suddenly asked after 2 hours of travel spent in complete silence. "Yes," the demolition man simply agreed. "What is between you?" Sasori didn't beat around the bush, but immediately asked the question that was bothering him. Even if he tried to hide his emotions behind an indifferent tone. "It doesn't concern you." "Yes," Deidara blurted out, not understanding what exactly had made him so angry. "It concerns MY partner and MY student. You shouldn't act like a caring dad, it doesn't suit you, Dana." The demolitionist tried to give his voice more self-confidence, which he didn't really feel. "Or maybe you're jealous of her, Although, no, you don't feel anything, Dana. You're a puppet." Day uttered the last word with hidden pain. Then he jumped on his bird and soared into the sky. He couldn't continue this conversation any longer. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to bear it and would burst into tears like a snotty girl. And he promised himself that Dana would never see his tears again. I never thought, Kaori, that we would become rivals, huh? Day sighed to himself. I am indeed jealous, Deidara. But not of her. Akasuna thought regretfully. But he would not let this frivolous misunderstanding understand how much his partner's actions hurt him. Chapter 4. Operation Remain in Akatsuki. Day 6. Fortunately, the plan worked. Kakuzu agreed to teach the girl Japanese. And then the first lesson began. First of all, it was necessary to learn hieroglyphs. The girl was horrified to learn that their language had 3 alphabets, each of which was used in different areas of life. They started with the simplest one. And yet, Kaori began to get confused and lost already on the 5th hieroglyph. Having suffered for about 2 hours and not moving a single step, the girl fell asleep without noticing it. Noticing this, the mentor quietly left the room, not wanting to disturb the tired girl. The next morning, Kaori was surprised to notice that she had memorized yesterday's hieroglyphs. Getting up before dawn was becoming a habit. Only the muscles that had been overworked the day before ached, spoiling her mood. Having quickly taken a shower and changed her clothes, the girl went to the kitchen, humming The Fool and the Lightning by Kish, and mentally drawing the memorized hieroglyphs. It seemed that nothing could spoil her mood today. How did you sleep, baby? Haydn greeted her, entering the kitchen and hugging the girl around the waist in a friendly manner. For which he received a slap on the wrist. Kaori was just finishing making her pancakes. Thank you, everything was great. Kakuzu, I remembered yesterday's lesson by heart. This was already addressed to the Immortal's partner, who was standing in the doorway. Let's study again tonight? She suggested. The financier looked at her carefully. He thought for a few seconds, weighing the pros and cons, but still agreed. Soon the others gathered. More precisely, Itachi, Kisame, and even Zetsu. The art partners were not supposed to return until tomorrow morning, and Pain and Conan had not been at the base since the beginning of the week. Your pancakes are excellent, Kisame praised the dessert. Haydn nodded vigorously. The others were more reserved, but also expressed their agreement. Because of these alone, you can be kept in the organization. Kaori didn't say that this was exactly what she was counting on. But she couldn't help but smile happily at the praise and the glimmer of hope in her eyes. She had noticed back home that her guests were having a soft spot for the seemingly simple dish. However, the Akatsuki had become addicted to ordinary Russian pancakes, like a drug. That's why the girl had started making them, pancakes, not Akatsuki, every day, hoping for their further help. The girl had nothing to do in her home world, especially after she had been spotted stealing the medallion. And the Akatsuki had become a new family for her, where even if not everything was perfect, you wouldn't get bored. And she didn't care what others thought of them. Kaori knew them as good friends and great guys, and a girlfriend. Itachi, I'll be back for training closer to lunch, the girl warned her departing mentor. He nodded in response, without turning around, and hurried off to his business. Haydn and Kakuzu followed his example. Zetsu left even earlier. So Kaori was left in the kitchen in the company of dirty dishes and Kisame, who was finishing the last of his pancakes. By the way, I forgot to warn you. Today you'll go to town with me. We need to replenish our food supplies, and since you're the one cooking now, they sent you to do the shopping too. And you? Kaori decided to be sarcastic, as the second cook. For fish for sushi? No, I'm here as a guard and guide, he said, not giving in to the provocation. It's just a pity that I won't be staying with you for long. Pain will send me home tomorrow, the girl sighed, lowering her head. It's true that we won't be visiting for long, Kisame agreed, thereby making the girl even more depressed. Where did the good mood go? But we won't let you go anywhere. We'll consider this your new home, the blue-skinned shinobi added a second later. Kisame. The girl rushed to him, tears immediately flowing from her eyes. Only here could I encourage her like this. Thank you for your support. I'll try my best tomorrow. Oh, come on. "Run, or you'll be late for training," the swordsman advised, turning Kaori to face the exit. The girl ran towards the workshops with enthusiasm and a joyful cry. And Kisame, watching her go, noticed the forgotten, unwashed plate. And he picked up a washcloth, deciding to help this child. Kaori ran into Sensei's workshop and immediately rushed to the work table. Today she hoped to assemble the puppet she had been working on the plans for yesterday. It was supposed to be a dragon. The girl had always admired the beauty and power of these mythical animals. So why not treat herself to something nice? Besides, she had already started thinking up several ideas regarding the hidden and obvious weapons of this puppet. Even if it was still a bit early for that. However, after a couple of hours, the girl realized that she would not be able to cope with such painstaking and labor-intensive work in a day. But she wanted her first combat doll to be perfect. She spent almost all the time allotted for training on cutting out and connecting parts of the monster's head. But it turned out excellent. To an outsider, this creation might seem creepy and ugly, but Kaori perceived it exclusively with maternal pride. The fanged mouth exuded enormous destructive power. The teeth, made of razor-sharp steel, were ready to tear the victim to pieces right now. And only the puppeteers in action stopped them. In the future, fire would also have to burst out of the mouth. A clock caught her eye. It was almost time for the next training session. Taking one last proud look at her creation, Kaori rushed headlong to the training ground, mentally making a note that it wouldn't hurt to paint the dragon a little brighter. Itachi was already waiting for her. Today's training was almost no different from the previous one. This time, the transition to the world of illusion was easier. Itachi pretended not to hear the unflattering comments about him that kept flashing through the girl's head. Realizing this, Kaori stopped holding back and happily let off steam, repeating the most memorable pearls of heightened speech. She rarely cursed herself, so she had little experience, but if you live with such a fanatical guy for several days in a row, you will inevitably fill this gap in your education. 3 days passed too quickly. The girl didn't even immediately notice how they returned to the real world. "Itachi, I won't be able to study any longer today," Kaori warned. "I need to go to town with Kisame. If it's with him, then it's not scary. He can stand up for both of you. Just try to make sure that as few people as possible see him. He is too remarkable in appearance," Uchiha advised as they parted. Kisame was already waiting for her at the edge of the clearing. "Think of it as a D-rank mission," he suggested, noticing out of the corner of his eye how Itachi leaned heavily against a tree, but still waved his hand at them, letting them know that they should go, and that he would be okay. "My first mission," the girl admired, not noticing the silent dialogue of her partners. "And you are my first partner. Will you teach me how to behave?" "That's unlikely. Shinobi usually behave strictly according to the regulations on missions. But we don't care about these formalities," explained the Nukmeen of the Mist. "Until a brawl starts, you can behave as if you were on a walk. Just don't forget to watch your surroundings. Be attentive." The dialogue continued on the way. They chatted happily. Kaori bombarded her companion with questions. He answered as best he could. The remarks were interspersed with jokes and laughter. So the girl didn't even notice how she found herself in front of a small town. "I'll stay here while you do your shopping," Kisame warned, disappearing from sight. Kaori had no choice but to enter the city. Her knowledge of writing was still too poor to find the right shop so easily. She had to look at the pictures above the establishments. Half an hour of wandering around the small town brought the girl to a market. There were quite a lot of people here. And finding the right product was not difficult. Fortunately, Kisame filled her in on the prices of food products. Walking past the stalls and having quite a considerable amount of money, Kaori chose only the best products. Today she planned a celebratory dinner, which could easily become a farewell. She had to take her bags of groceries out of town several times and leave them with the shinobi who accompanied her. The girl physically could not carry such a heavy load around with her all the time. Having once again run through the list of ordered products and not finding any fish there, the Akatsuki knew about the girl's dislike of seafood. Kaori decided to surprise them. There was only one question left: what kind of fish was needed for sushi? Approaching the right counter, the girl began to carefully examine the goods. Her eyes ran wide from the variety of the assortment. There was almost everything here, from tiny dried fish to still fluttering giants. Kaori did not know the names, and the author was too lazy to come up with something specific. Finally, the girl made up her mind and asked the saleswoman for help. The plump woman behind the counter smiled broadly, showing all her goodwill and willingness to cooperate. She wiped her hands on her not-so-clean apron and began to chatter, praising her goods. In the end, Kaori took several types of fish, mentally praising the woman for her knowledge of her trade. On her way back to Kisame, the girl came across a small shop. Judging by the picture on the sign, it was a clothing store. There was still money left, and Kaori decided to pick out a change of clothes. Mentally imagining what the organization's financier would say about this. The girl was already privy to the details of the relationship between Kakuzu and money. Quickly choosing inexpensive but comfortable clothes that were suitable not only for training but also for walking around the streets of her home world, Kaori hurried to the exit of the city. However, right in the middle of the street, she was roughly grabbed from behind, her mouth covered, and dragged in the completely opposite direction. A few minutes later, the girl and her kidnappers were already outside the city, but on the opposite side from Kisame. Soon the girl was allowed to look around. The city was several dozen meters away from her, but their company was reliably hidden from prying eyes by trees. A small but turbulent river flowed nearby. At her feet stood a miraculously unlost shopping bag. The kidnappers were not afraid of her at all, and therefore did not even think to hide their faces, but the girl felt chakra in them. She clearly could not cope with them. In the hands of one of the three opponents, Kaori noticed her half-empty, but still quite plump wallet. "Listen, redhead," she turned to one of the kidnappers, who seemed more presentable, "isn't robbery too petty for a shinobi? Where is your pride?" The most interesting thing is that they were not at all surprised that she knew that they were shinobi. They were much more worried about something else. "Quirt, you were supposed to put a jinjutsu on her." The one the girl was addressing was indignant. It seemed he really was the leader of this mini gang. "So why does she see my face?" "I did." "She must be under an illusion," the puny-looking guy, who, however, possessed the largest reserve of chakra of the three, justified himself. Kaori realized the reason for their carelessness. They simply thought that she would not recognize them. "I have to disappoint you, boys, but illusion techniques don't work on me." "So much the worse for you," the red-haired man grinned, folding the seals. "I'll have to get rid of you. If you hadn't recognized our faces, you would have stayed alive." Earth element, earth lump. The next second, Kaori felt her legs being pulled down by the clay, giving her no chance to escape. Bad suspicions crept into her head. The suspicions were justified. The robbers threw the girl into the river and went about their business. The impact with the water's surface knocked the wind out of her, causing her to scream involuntarily. The next moment, the girl began to cough from the water that had gotten inside. Her lungs burned. The water seemed icy to Kaori. Her hands began to go numb, and the shackles pulled her to the bottom with force, depriving her of the slightest chance of salvation. Already losing consciousness, Kaori felt something warm and familiar nearby, which seemed like a miracle in this icy hell. And the next second she passed out. "Hey, wake up!" Kisame was in despair. Losing the girl, to whom not only he but everyone in the organization had become attached, seemed like the most terrible crime. He was only a few seconds late. Dealing with the attackers was a matter of one water technique. They wouldn't bother anyone else. But Kaori had managed to swallow a lot of water and was now barely showing signs of life. There was obvious hypothermia. The girl's body was completely unprepared for such tests, and therefore it was necessary to urgently bring her to her senses, otherwise the little one could die. And they would definitely not forgive him for this. If even Itachi, who was always cold and indifferent to everything, allowed himself to cast warm, almost tender glances at the girl when he thought that no one could see it. The others were not worth mentioning. "We'll have to resort to extreme measures." A pressure on his chest, another, and another. The touch of her lips. A sharp exhalation of air. And nothing. After the academy, Kisame performed artificial respiration for the first time. There had never been any drowned people in the Mist Village. And even more so in Akatsuki. So he lacked a little practice. And yet it was too early to give up. Kaori was not breathing and it was his fault. He shouldn't have left her alone for so long. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Heart massage. The only sign of life in this fragile body was the trembling. The girl was terribly cold, but that was not the main problem. And so Kisame continued. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Heart massage. Come on, breathe. Cough. Well, finally. A trickle of water flowed from Kaori's mouth. The girl bent over in a fit of coughing, at the same time pushing out the air and the remaining moisture. "KK, kiss me," she called in a voice hoarse from coughing. "I'm here. Don't worry," he encouraged, putting his arm around her shoulders. And again he felt the drowned woman trembling violently. "You're shaking. Take off your wet clothes," the shinobi ordered. However, it was he who had to undress her. The girl's fingers were numb from the cold and did not want to obey their mistress. A few minutes later, wet, and in places torn, clothes were lying on the ground, and the girl was wrapped in a warm black and red cloak. The girl couldn't walk on her own, and 2 large bags of groceries prevented Kisame from carrying her. They had to stay near the city for a while until Kaori regained her strength. "You're still shaking," a simple statement of fact 15 minutes later. "It's sea cold," the girl complained about the injustice of the world. "And what do you suggest? Warm you up? Sorry, but you're a little inconveniently dressed, undressed, for that." "That's right," Kaori came to her senses, "I bought myself a change of clothes." "I'll be right back." Kisame disappeared from sight, only to return soon. He was holding a bag in his hands. The girl quickly changed into dry clothes and handed the coat to its owner. It became warmer, but Kaori was still shivering. "Come here." Kisame hugged the girl and wrapped them both in a cloak. It became much warmer, Kaori relaxed and even dozed off. However, she didn't have long to bask in the warmth, it was time to return to the lair. She had to get out of the cozy circle of the Fogman's arms and yawningly drag herself after him. "Let's go home," Kisame suggested then. "Home. Sounds good," the girl noted without much enthusiasm, but nevertheless grabbed her companion by the arm and walked away from the river. It was already getting dark, and the journey ahead of them was long. It looked like she wouldn't be able to study with Kakuzu today. "You know, I forgot to thank you." "Thank you, Kisame, for saving me." "It's nothing," the shinobi waved it off. "And let's not tell the others about it. Reputation, you know." "No problem," the girl agreed, "just come up with your own excuse for why we're so late. And deal with Kakuzu yourself about the money, too." "Kaori, don't you think you're taking on too much? Your wallet was stolen," the swordsman was indignant. "But you were the one in charge," the girl blinked her eyelashes with the most innocent look, to which Kisame couldn't resist laughing loudly. "Let's move on." In the end, we still came out on top. With these words, he tossed a familiar wallet, tightly stuffed with money, into the girl's hand. "No one will be against it if I give our financier only the required portion." Even to the eye it was obvious that Kakuzu would get less than half. "In half?" the girl suggested. "You'll manage," Kisame clearly felt his superiority. "After all, I'm the one in charge here." "Bummer." He took her at her word. "Say thank you for the new clothes," the Nukni noted, interrupting further argument. "Thank you," Kaori muttered under her breath. "Ow." The next second, the girl sprawled on the ground, whining pitifully and holding her injured leg. It was already dark, so it was no surprise that she hadn't noticed the route. "What should we do with you?" Hashigake sighed, leaning towards her. "Will you be able to walk?" Kaori nodded in agreement and tried to stand up, but fell back down with a muffled ouch. "I see." Since the shinobi's hands were busy with bags, Kaori had to settle on his shoulders, slightly pushing Samahata aside. "I'm becoming like a rag," sighed Kisame. The girl on his shoulder smiled happily, ruffling his hair and surreptitiously twirling her completely unharmed leg. "Here it is, sweet revenge. A trifle, but nice." Chapter 4. Operation Remain in Akatsuki. Day 7. Kaori woke up with a premonition of trouble. But she didn't expect anything else. Today is her last day in this world, in this organization, with these people. Today her fate was being decided. Pain would check what she had learned during the week and whether it was worth leaving the untalented girl in Akatsuki. In truth, Kaori had no desire to join the organization. All she needed was to be allowed to stay here, near the people she cared about. She didn't want to get up. She realized that she hadn't worked out with Kakuzu yesterday, hadn't trained with Itachi in the evening, hadn't finished her puppet. But she barely remembered how they had gotten to the lair. Fatigue had overcome the girl, her temperature had risen, and she had no strength for anything other than sleep. Now Kaori felt great, but she had neither the strength nor the desire to get up. The girl decided to take a day off at the wrong time. And only after Hayden's unceremonious wake-up call did she get up. Today they had sandwiches and tea for breakfast. Breakfast was silent until... "The leader will arrive in a couple of hours," Itachi said. "So fast?" The girl was shocked. "But they haven't returned yet. I thought it would all happen in the evening. There's no point in postponing the inevitable. One way or another, the test will happen." Zetsu's cold tone made her angry. "And you, probably, will only be glad?" Long-held tears flowed from her eyes. There was no answer. Zetsu chose to pretend he hadn't heard her words. Hayden turned away, unable to watch the girl suffer. His partner suddenly remembered that he hadn't counted his savings for a long time, and delved into checking the financial state of Akatsuki. But now he was constantly confused, unable to concentrate on his favorite pastime. Itachi, as always, was outwardly unperturbed. And God alone knows what a storm of feelings raged in his soul. Kisame, looking around at the people present in the kitchen, sighed and took on the unusual mission of a comforter. Usually, this was done by day, but today, as luck would have it, he was not there. "Stop talking nonsense. Nobody wants you to go back to your world. But it's not up to us to decide. So instead of whining here, try harder in front of the leader." It worked. Kaori pulled herself together, and nodded decisively. "I will do my best." Without waiting any longer for breakfast to be over, the girl slipped out of the kitchen. And the rest of the group dispersed a few minutes later, pretending to be busy with some important matters. Kaori went to the workshop first. She had no time for classes today. All she had time to do was seal her notes and the puppet and scrolls and write a few lines to Sasori-sensei, in case they didn't have time to see each other. The girl drove such thoughts away, but they persistently continued to spoil her already not very cheerful mood. Another letter was intended for Day. Kaori gave both messages to Itachi. It didn't take her 5 minutes to gather the rest of her things. After that, the girl went to the training ground, where she decided to practice the kunai techniques that Uchiha had taught her yesterday. The others hung around nearby, looking at Kaori and wondering if they could convince Pain to leave the girl. 2 hours passed unnoticed. Even somehow too quickly. But, nevertheless, here the leader and Konan are standing in front of the slightly embarrassed girl, making it clear that no one is going to make any concessions to her and will not postpone the credit fight. Itachi was chosen as the opponent. On the one hand, it was to the girl's advantage, as she had gotten used to his fighting style over an endless number of sparring sessions, but on the other hand, Uchiha was perhaps the strongest fighter, and to give in now would mean admitting the girl's weakness. The girl turned around again, but Sensei and his partner were nowhere to be found. The fight could not be postponed any further. The fight lasted 20 seconds at most. Itachi did not use the Sharingan and its super abilities, partly equalizing the balance of power. And yet, the fight was a losing one from the start. Kaori managed to repel the first 3 kunai attacks, then she had to simply dodge, because the enemy knocked the weapon out of her hands. That's when the girl was grateful to Uchiha for the endless torment of her muscles. In a fairly short time, her speed increased significantly. And yet, she was still too slow. A shallow but rather sensitive cut made Kaori wince. And nothing more, training in Tsukiyomi taught if not to get used to pain, then at least to live with it for a while. A step back, another. Here is a kunai aimed at the girl's neck, rapidly approaching. Kaori did not know what exactly made her act this way, intuition, self-preservation instinct, or something else, but the girl acted in a way that she had not yet been taught. Lightning fast, she snatched a scroll from her belt, opened it. The kunai was blocked by a puppet. That very first, completely unsuitable for combat, unarmed doll, created only to practice control skills. But it was enough. Splinters flew in different directions, forcing her to cover her eyes, which the enemy took advantage of. But Kaori again substituted a piece of wood for a blow. The doll flew apart in a couple of seconds, having managed to parry several strong blows. The fight was swift and short. Itachi froze over the girl who had fallen to the ground, pressing the blade of the kunai to her neck. The fight was lost, but those present were impressed. They did not expect even half of what they saw from the girl. Pain sighed with both regret and relief. He, like everyone else present, felt sorry for the girl, but he had no choice. He had known for several days that no matter what he saw today, he would send Kaori back. However, if she somehow won, that would be a problem. "Kaori, you're coming home." The tone was cold and emotionless, but it was impossible not to obey. The girl's heart, still lying on the ground, skipped a beat, then a second, and then began to beat with frantic force. The brain refused to accept reality. Itachi, who was still hovering over his student, showed confusion on his face. How could this be? Even Kaori had managed to surprise him, and Pain could do it so easily. The tears in the girl's eyes were the last straw. He pulled away abruptly and turned to the leader, but the latter didn't even look at him. "You have 15 minutes to say goodbye." This finally knocked the ground out from under the girl, and if she had not been lying down now, she would have definitely fallen. The men surrounded the sobbing girl, vying with each other to calm her down. Now was not the time to keep up their masks. Conan stood a little further away, looking confused. She herself did not understand what had suddenly come over Pain. She did not want to lose her friend, but who was she to contradict the leader? At the end of the allotted time, Kaori looked around the surrounding landscape for the last time with a confused look in search of two familiar figures, but she did not find anyone. And they had promised. It seemed that if Sasori were here, she would be able to stay in this world. After all, it was thanks to him that the girl got here. Finally, they began to open the portal. Kaori hugged each person present in turn. Conan hugged her tightly, whispering words of regret. Itachi whispered that she was fun to be with and promised to pass on the letters to their recipients. Kisame patted the girl on the head, asking her to take care of herself. Zetsu remained silent, but for a moment he held Kaori close, almost tenderly. Kakuzu thrust an envelope into the girl's hand. He clearly understood what awaited the girl in her home world after she had been spotted next to them. And this should help, at least a little. Pain did not stand aside. When the girl trustingly pressed herself against him, he leaned down and quietly whispered just one word, "Sorry," and then let her go. The last one was Haydn. Even at such a moment, he remained true to himself. He hugged the girl somewhat obscenely, kissed her on the cheek and quietly whispered, "Don't despair. We'll definitely think of something. Give us 2 hours." And then with a conspiratorial smile he stepped back. Kaori smiled warmly at him. The pagan's words made her believe in a miracle, drying her tears. She entered the portal more calmly, secretly hoping that Haydn would be able to fulfill his promise. The homeworld greeted Kaori, or now Karina again, with a cold wind, the slush of a February thaw and the grayness of an inconspicuous alley. There was no point in waiting 2 hours in one place, especially since the weather and her clothes did not match. She needed to find shelter or warm clothes. But she had no money. At that very moment, the girl noticed that she was clutching the envelope that Kakuzu had handed her. Unfolding it, the girl found a credit card and a piece of paper with a PIN code. After checking her balance at the nearest ATM, the girl counted the numerous zeros several times, smiled broadly and thanked the old miser. Now here was a man who could make money out of nothing. Smiling, the girl went shopping. If she was going to come back, she would bring gifts. First of all, Karina ran into a boutique. Fortunately, the amount of money and the high level of service made it possible to quickly buy clothes and shoes. Having dressed for the weather, the girl moved towards the nearest supermarket. The familiar streets of her hometown rushed past until the girl stopped at a huge shopping center. Here you could find anything you wanted. Grocery shopping took up most of her allotted time. But the hustle and bustle gave her an opportunity to distract herself from heavy thoughts and doubts. With a full cart of groceries, the lion's share of which were sweets adored by her friends, she headed for the exit. There were still gifts left. With Conan, everything was simple. The girl bought her cosmetics and jewelry. What is worth just one set in the form of intertwined roses, made of white and red gold? Karina thought about the rest. Fireworks would be ideal for Deidara, but the girl did not dare to take them. Some nice clay figurines caught my eye. They became a present for the demolition man. For a change, he could use something non-explosive. For Sasori, she picked out a chemistry set with a bunch of reagents, drugs, and other things. Zetsu will get a green friend from the flower department, just as carnivorous. It's just a pity that Karina didn't remember the name. She was never keen on Latin, Japanese is enough for her. She picked out gifts for the others in the armory. Itachi got a set of throwing knives that were more works of art than weapons. Kisame had a special sword care product waiting for him. When asked about the availability of harakiri knives, the seller measured the strange customer with his gaze, but still handed over the goods. Just looking at the set, Karina realized that the pagan would be delighted with the gift. Pain was given a magnificent katana with silver engravings on the blade. Already on the way out, the girl came across the computer department. This is where she can let loose. Without wasting time, which was already in short supply, the girl quickly chose an MP3, a laptop and a bunch of other gadgets for computers. She also had to pamper Kakuzu. The crowning glory was the video camera that Karina had long dreamed of. Having grabbed a few more CDs with music and movies, and having grabbed all the CDs with software and all sorts of encyclopedias from the counter, Karina paid and finally decided to think about how to carry all this to the portal. Luckily, for spendthrifts like her, the supermarket provided free delivery to any point in the city. Having unloaded everything in some dark alley, the workers left, leaving the girl alone with her purchases. There were still 15 minutes left until the appointed time, and the girl could only wait. But nothing happened at the appointed time. Neither did it happen half an hour later, nor an hour later. Karina gradually fell into despondency, which turned into panic. She had been abandoned. All the deadlines had already passed, the portal had not opened. Haydn had deceived her. They would not take the useless burden from another world. She wanted to rage and throw. To punch the impudent face of the Zyasanov priest harder, just to not feel so lonely. But instead, Karina started crying. Sobbing like a little girl. All day long, she had been encouraged and then trampled on. Her mood had been jumping from the sky to a record low. It was unsettling, took a lot of energy, and now she didn't care what random passers-by thought of her, or whether anyone would find her. Curled up on the dirty, wet ground and already beginning to shiver from the cold, the girl sobbed selflessly. She mourned her unenviable fate and the life that she could have found in the circle of friends, but never did. This went on for quite a long time until the owner of the caring, warm hands forced her to pay attention to himself, pressing the desperate girl tightly to his chest. Dana, let's hurry, Deidara groaned for the umpteenth time in the last 2 hours. This tone irritated Red Sand Scorpio. We still have plenty of time left. Sasori tried not to show his irritation, hiding behind his usual mask of indifference. What if we're late? Yeah. Don't you want to say goodbye to your student? Day didn't let up. Just say that you want to see your girlfriend, and yet, the partner's anxiety was partly transmitted to the puppet master, forcing him to quicken his pace. The girl is not to blame for what is happening between them. And Sasori has become attached to her. Yes, I do, and I'm not going to hide it. She's very dear to me, the demolition man declared, not even suspecting how much his words hurt the seemingly insensitive doll. Shut up already, Akasuna finally couldn't stand it. If I hear another sound from you, I'll rip your tongue out. Are you jealous, Sasori no Dana? Well, go ahead and be jealous. I'm not the only one who has to suffer, Day decided to himself. During the entire last mission, even the most innocent conversations between the partners were not going well. One way or another, any dialogue came down to the topic of Kaori. And each was thinking about his own, terribly jealous of the other, but not daring to tell about his feelings. All conversations ended the same way, resentment and prolonged silence. Until Deidara got bored with it and found a new reason to start a conversation. And everything was repeated again. How much longer do we have to go? Go could only be said with a stretch, considering that one was flying on a bird, and the other was riding in Hiriko. Half an hour, at the same pace. Maybe we should hurry? The blonde tried again. In response, the puppet's metal tail rushed towards him, making it clear that the conversation was over. Another half hour later, they found themselves in a clearing where all the members of the organization had gathered. As soon as he saw them, Pain left the meeting place. Relief was clearly visible on his face. Conan reluctantly followed the leader. What happened? Where is Kaori? Day immediately began to bombard those present with questions. She returned to her world, Haydn sighed. The leader didn't let her stay. And now we can't open the portal again. What do you say now, Dana? The demolition man attacked his partner. Don't shout. You're preventing me from thinking, Sasori noted coldly. How much time has passed? This was already applied to Itachi, as the most adequate one. About 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours, Day was horrified. Did he have to be so late? We'll make it, Deidara. We have plenty of time, Deidara, censored, muttered under his breath, but he didn't bother or distract Dana. Maybe he really would come up with something useful. Meanwhile, Sasori was completely immersed in calculations. After half an hour, he could say with 90% certainty that he knew what to do. Due to the lack of a medallion, it was necessary to draw a bunch of auxiliary symbols and put in a lot of effort. And yet, the portal should not last longer than a few seconds. I hope she's still there, Haydn sighed. We're almost 2 hours late. But there was no more time to waste. With each passing minute, it was becoming more and more difficult to open the portal. So, all the preparations were complete, all that was left was to apply the 4 elements. The Uchiha took care of the fire, Zetsu provided the earth, Kisame the water, and Kakuzu the air. This time they didn't have to exert so much strength to open the portal, as all their chakra was now at their disposal. Through the portal window, the shinobi saw a huddled, dirty, sobbing lump, in which they recognized with horror their acquaintance. Without wasting any time, Akasuna extended chakra threads through the portal, picking up the girl and her many purchases. Day immediately rushed to his friend's aid, hugging her close, not paying attention to the dirt. Don't cry, baby. You're home already, yes, he whispered soothingly to her. Day? Kaori couldn't believe her eyes. Is it really you? So you managed to. There were many strong friendly hugs and more tears. But now Kaori was crying from happiness. You should join in too, Pain noted. And what about you, Nagato? Conan was surprised. I'm afraid my superiors are calling me on the carpet. The girl left, and Pain prepared himself for a dressing down for not following orders. But there was no regret. He had knowingly violated the order by leaving and giving the others a chance to return the girl. Even he had fallen in love with her trust and devotion. Besides, she makes excellent pancakes. Nagato swallowed the saliva that had instantly accumulated and prepared for the transfer. I expect an explanation, Pain, a sharp, commanding voice. The owner of the Reningen looked at the man who had summoned him with confusion. He deigned to clarify. I sensed foreign chakra at the base. This? This is the chakra of that girl I told you about. Madara-san, the Akatsuki leader reported. You were supposed to get rid of her within a week. The tone of the founder of the Uchiha clan did not bode well. Unexpected complications arose. The members of the organization spoke out in favor of it remaining. I have never seen such unanimity among them. Now Pain was glad that the interlocutor could not read his thoughts, recalling that he had not really resisted the rebellion that had arisen. And what kind of bird is this that could unite an organization worse than a Reningen? A cold tone, zero emotions, except perhaps the slightest curiosity. Her name is Kaori. She is 15 years old. She is from another. From another world, interrupted Madara. Yes, I have heard of it. There was obvious distrust in the Uchiha's voice. Better tell me that she is not a spy. I need a 100% guarantee. Get into her brain and pull out every last thought. That's not possible, the red-haired man sighed. Why? The true leader was surprised. Kaori is not susceptible to telepathy. What? Why don't I know anything about this? What other abilities does she exhibit? Madara immediately became interested. Kaori is immune to Genjutsu, up to Tsukiyomi Itachi, and Heiden's techniques do not work on her, reported Pain. Otherwise, her abilities are more than mediocre. Without the Byakugan, it is impossible to say for sure, but it is immediately obvious that the amount of chakra available to her, in the best-case scenario, will not exceed the level of an average Chunin. But even this is still a long way off. The girl is learning to control puppets from Sasori, but so far it is not working well. She is also training taijutsu with Itachi. The only thing she is good at is alchemy and making poisons. She does not claim membership in the organization. Pain finished his report. Madara nodded in response and still decided. Okay, let him stay. But don't take your eyes off her. And warn Sasori. That's all, you can go. Pain didn't need to be asked twice and disappeared. Well, let's see who you are, Kaori, Madara decided, silently moving towards the base. Chapter 5. The hard easy task Don't sleep. A sharp, hoarse voice brought the girl out of her half-consciousness. She perked up and yawned. Can you be quieter? After all, you are a kunoichi. The man lying next to her was indignant. It was obvious that he was barely holding back from giving his partner a slap on the back of the head, or something worse. It's my own fault. I haven't slept for 2 days, the girl was indignant. You'd think it was your first time. No. But that doesn't make it any easier. I want to sleep. Be quiet, the shinobi hissed. They'll be here soon. I still don't understand why you chose this place. There were a lot of places closer to the lair that would be just as good for an ambush. The girl looked around, not finding anything remarkable in the surrounding landscape. An ordinary forest road, century-old trees growing almost on the roadway. But such a landscape stretches for many kilometers in both directions. Why did you have to walk here for 2 days in a row? She couldn't help but yawn again. Further on, several more shinobi will join their guard, which will complicate the task. Especially for you. I am strong enough for this mission, otherwise I would not be here, the girl objected. In response, the partner only chuckled, making it clear that the leader's order was not an argument for him. What? Oh, nothing, the shinobi waved it off. I've been on more than one mission, the girl noted, and they've all ended successfully. Because Sasori and Deidara were constantly ensuring you, his partner noted. I did a lot too, the kunoichi objected. Although she couldn't help but agree that it was much easier with her usual partners. At least she could rest on the back of a huge clay bird during long, grueling marches. Oh really? The skepticism in his voice was enough to throw even a stone statue off balance. Naturally, his partner couldn't resist. Shall we check? The girl began to boil. Another time, Kaori. They're already here. Her opponent objected. Get ready. Kakuzu, you're a bore, the kunoichi delivered her verdict, taking out a scroll with a combat puppet and preparing to jump. Well, here we go, flashed decisively through the girl's head as Gornika's scroll unfurled and her fingers intertwined into the familiar seal of summoning a battle puppet. For a brief moment she thought she saw someone else looking at her, but it was gone. Perhaps Pain had sent Zetsu to follow her. Did the leader still not trust her? After all, she had proven her loyalty more than once, if not to the organization, then to its members. It took Kaori weeks of painstaking work under the watchful guidance of her sensei to achieve the desired result. Sasori himself helped a lot. But it was worth it. The beast did not resemble ordinary puppets, at least in appearance. There were no visible seams or joints. All the joints were reliably hidden. And now the defenders of the convoy were taken aback when they saw a red gold dragon flying at them, as if it had come from an illustration in one of the girls' adored fantasy novels. They hesitated for only a split second, but that was enough for Kaori to attack. The dragon's mouth opened, releasing 100 poison needles, smeared with a specially developed poison. It acted instantly, even a small scratch was enough. All in the best traditions of her teacher. Only this poison was not fatal. Along with the kunoichi's attack, Kakuzu also began to act. The Vodopodov Nuknin took on 7 of the 10 guards, leaving the remaining soldiers and civilians to his partner. It was all over before it even started. The released masks of the Nuknin dealt with their targets without any problems. There was no need to even use the elements. The guards, distracted by the dragon, did not even have time to try to defend themselves. While Kakuzu was searching the fallen people for the scroll, which was the mission's goal, and at the same time robbing them of their last Ryo, Kaori decided to check the cargo. There was nothing special about it, ordinary wood. For anyone else, but not for the puppet master's apprentice. Kaori immediately recognized the most valuable type of wood, difficult to process, but several times stronger than ordinary. Here was a suitable gift for Sasori-sensei. The girl took a quick look at Kakuzu and realized that she had a few more minutes to spare. Taking out a clean scroll, the kunoichi began sealing. "Kaori, you are too soft," the Nuknin reproached, searching another victim of the attack. Touching the merchant's neck, he felt a weak pulse. The instinct of self-preservation and the habit trained over the years screamed to finish the man off. Only the leader's order stopped him. Pain strictly forbade finishing off Kaori's opponents without a special need. "Rather not cruel enough to take the life of every person we meet," the kunoichi objected. "There's no point in killing these people. They didn't see us, and the poison knocked them out for a few hours, so we'll have time to escape without fear of pursuit." Kakuzu chuckled, not considering it necessary to continue the argument, and moved on to the next victim. Meanwhile, his partner finished the sealing. "And in general, you need to be able to find the positive side in everything," Kaori continued her previous thought. "Everyone knows that Akatsuki never leaves witnesses alive. And this will look like a regular robbery. There are no traces of the techniques used, and my senbons have no distinguishing features. You can find such things on every fifth highwayman. The poison will evaporate in a few minutes, leaving no trace, and people will wake up with a headache and amnesia, so that the memories of the last minutes before the attack will be completely erased." And the scroll was taken as if by accident, for company. The return journey was almost as bad as the previous 2-day march. Kakuzu agreed to stop for a rest only after several hours of fast running. For this purpose, a very convenient, almost 5-star cave in a dense forest was chosen. It would really be suitable for living, if not for the mountains of dust everywhere and the terrible dampness. Kakuzu stubbornly pretended that they bypassed the city precisely for safety reasons, and not because he was sorry to shell out a few coins for the minimal amenities in the hotel. Kaori did not expect more, and something edible for dinner. And so the girl had to swallow the pill once again and, wrapped in a sleeping bag, try to fall asleep. Despite her extreme fatigue, she just couldn't sleep. Perhaps it was the dampness, or maybe it was the rumbling in her stomach. Once again during this mission, Kaori decided that a couple more missions with Kakuzu would give her a stomach ulcer. Having cursed under her breath at a certain old curmudgeon, the girl turned over onto her other side and tried to fall asleep, promising herself that she would make her partner regret all the inconveniences that she had to endure because of him. Already falling asleep, Kaori again felt someone else's attention. But perhaps it was already a dream. The girl woke up from a slight chill. Over the past few hours, the sleeping bag had become completely damp and now did not warm her, but rather the opposite. At the opposite wall of the cave, as if nothing had happened, Kakuzu was sleeping, wrapped in his signature Akatsuki cloak. Sneezing loudly instead of greeting, Kaori cursed again and began to climb out of the cave. She had clearly spent too much time in there. Kakuzu came out a few seconds later. His appearance hadn't changed at all, not even his coat had been rumpled. Still trembling in her shorts and top, Kaori, perhaps for the first time, regretted not wearing the Akatsuki uniform. "How does Haydn tolerate you?" The girl was amazed at the fanatic's endurance. "He has no choice," the shinobi shrugged. "I couldn't do that," Kaori admitted. "That's why they didn't pair us up before. They gave you time to gain experience," the financier chuckled. The argument was interrupted by a coughing fit. "Kakuzu, do you have anything for a cold?" the girl asked, clearing her throat. Where from? I'm a surgeon and I don't deal with such trifles, the man remarked arrogantly. Woi. How important we are. Kaori mimicked. I would kill you if I could, she hissed, but refrained from further comments, feeling another coughing fit approaching. No way. I won't agree to another mission with this crazy woman for any amount of money. Kakuzu was indignant, entering his room and locking the door tightly. Who would have thought that some weak girl could turn an easy mission from a B rank into a race for survival? A cold turned a kind creature by nature into a real monster, ready to do anything to drive his neighbor to the brink. For the first time, Kakuzu was sure that he was lucky with his partner. As they say, everything is known in comparison. And Haydn, with his eternal religious hang-ups and whining about everything, now seemed like an angel to the missing mean of the falls. He'd rather endure those bloody rituals and crazy prayers 5 times a day than spend another day alone with that cute spawn of hell. How could Sasori and Deidara tolerate her? No, he definitely needed a vacation. To go somewhere quiet, to change the scenery, to heal his nerves. Otherwise, he'd have to start looking for another new heart. Yes, that's exactly what he should do. He'd wait another 15 minutes and then go to the leader for a vacation. The main thing was not to run into that red-haired beast. She seemed to have given Pain her report. The conversation with the leader went quite well. Despite all the familiarity in communication with Pain and absolute immunity to the psychic techniques of the Rinnegan, Kaori was still afraid of the red-haired man. There was something about him that made her respect and even bow before him. Nevertheless, the leader promised to think about the request for sick leave, and this was already a breakthrough. Therefore, with a light heart and a sense of accomplishment, the girl headed to the sensei's workshop to give him the valuable trophies. But she did not have time to get there. Deidara. It was rare to hear so much positivity in the kunoichi's voice. She met the blonde in the corridor near the door to the workshop. Unable to resist, she threw herself into the guy's arms, running up to him and throwing herself on his neck and wrapping her arms and legs around him. Kaori? The shinobi, not expecting such a swift attack, couldn't stay in place. Under the weight of the girl, he took a couple of steps back, pushing the workshop door with his back and falling to the floor. It didn't turn out well, Kaori whispered a few seconds later, quieting down under the displeased gaze of the sensei, whose peace they had so unceremoniously disturbed. Embarrassed, the girl nevertheless got off the discouraged demolition man and looked down. Maybe someone could explain to me what kind of show you're putting on here. Akasuna's voice was as cold and almost dispassionate as always, but Kaori, who was used to communicating with him, clearly caught the notes of discontent and irritation. Sorry, sensei, it's all my fault. I just missed you and Day so much that I couldn't resist, the girl confessed. That's no reason to act like a child, the master noted. Yes, Sasori-sensei, I will improve, the kunoichi promised with the most honest look. It's just that Kakuzu is so boring? Deidara prompted, lightly hugging her shoulders. No kidding, Kaori smiled gratefully at him in response to his help. I almost went crazy with him. Achoo. And I even managed to catch a cold, she complained about the financier. Sasori just shook his head, realizing that it was unlikely that the student would be re-educated. Deidara, on the contrary, was amused by his friend's prank. What the girl really admired was her attitude towards the members of the organization. Her perception of the environment was absolutely abnormal. So she had a strange relationship with her mentor. Despite the rather nasty character of the sensei and his dark past, and the present was no brighter, the student was not afraid of him at all. Respected. Yes. But not afraid. And this despite all her weakness in comparison with the S-class criminals that the people around her were. Oh, right. Kaori suddenly remembered. Achoo. Sasori. Achoo. Sensei, I was thinking. Achoo. We've known each other for so long, and I still don't know when your birthday is. Sasori frowned. Why such questions all of a sudden? Deidara, on the contrary, pricked up his ears. He, too, still didn't know the answer to this question. So, I came across a suitable gift for you on the mission, the girl said, proudly handing the scroll to the mentor. Just be careful with opening it, there's a lot of stuff in there. The warning came just in time. Sasori, who was already unsealing the scroll, showed uncharacteristic haste and changed several movements in time. Instead of all the wood sealed in the scroll, which would have been enough to fill the workshop from top to bottom, only a few boards appeared. Sasori's eyes lit up with the excitement of a master whose skill had been challenged. "Where did you get this treasure?" Deidara had never seen such a violent display of emotions from his partner in the several years of their acquaintance. "This breed is so rare that even I see it for the first time. And in such quantity, too." Akasuna had no trouble calculating the approximate volume of the scroll's contents. The demolition man's fingers involuntarily clenched at the sight of such a reaction. Why didn't he react to his actions like that? Why did Red Sand Scorpion only feel irritation and rudeness towards his partner, or even worse, complete indifference? Kaori winced, feeling a rather painful sensation on her shoulders. She turned to the blonde in bewilderment, but he had already pulled himself together, loosening his grip. Deciding to deal with her friend's strange behavior later, the girl recounted the details of the mission to Sensei. "I see. Check your puppets. You have half an hour, then training." Sasori noted completely indifferently. He had managed to lose all interest in the student, switching his attention to the material in front of him. "They're fine." "I already know that," Kaori said, a little haughtily, but with a hint of resentment for being underestimated. Akasuna turned to them so abruptly that the girl took a step back in surprise, noticing with relief her loyal protector behind her. Day was focused and ready for any turn of events. His partner looked extremely displeased, and this could result in a swift attack at any moment. "The first rule of a puppet master," Sasori demanded. "Always be sure of the serviceability of your weapon." The girl blurted out the memorized phrase automatically, already realizing her mistake. Nodding in defeat, she went to another corner of the workshop, to her workplace. Indeed, the main rule of survival for a shinobi is his skills and competence in his equipment. And a puppeteer's weapon is his puppets. Throughout her training, Sasori had instilled in her the habit of checking and rechecking her puppets at every opportunity. Because you never know how soon you might need them. And any, even the most insignificant mistake, can be fatal. "I'll help." "Yes," Deidara volunteered, seeing that his partner had completely switched to work. "What was that recently?" the girl asked after some time in a whisper, glancing at her shoulders. Day, of course, immediately understood what was being talked about, but preferred to play the fool. "Okay, we'll talk later." Kaori backed down, switching her attention to Gornik, who they were currently working on. "Leader-sama, may I come in?" "It's about time. Since when does Kaori bring me the mission report? And give me the scroll, finally?" The leader was clearly not in the mood. Without further ado, Kakuzu handed over the scroll. After glancing over the complex diagrams and drawings, Pain nodded in satisfaction and handed Kaori's report to his subordinate in return. "Is there anything to add?" After quickly reading the text and noting to himself that the girl had finally begun to write without mistakes, Kakuzu confirmed that the mission had been successful, without casualties, and that the report was quite complete. "You may go." Pain pointed to the door, immediately losing interest in his interlocutor and delving into a more thorough study of the scroll he had brought. "Do you want to say something?" Pain asked, looking up from his papers after a few minutes and noticing with surprise that Kakuzu had not moved from his spot. "No. I mean, yes, Leader-sama," the financier caught himself. "I wanted to ask for a vacation," the man blurted out in one breath. To say that Pain was surprised would be to overstate the capabilities of his Rinnegan. Even he hadn't expected this from Kakuzu. "Did I hear right? Are you asking to go on a free vacation?" Kakuzu swallowed nervously. The two halves of his eye were fighting with each other. His brain was calculating the potential financial losses during his absence and insisting that it would be more profitable to stay. At the same time, his entire nervous system was begging for rest. But Kakuzu was prepared for this turn of events. His contract clearly stated in black and white that there was no paid leave in Akatsuki. So the victory in this difficult fight was left to his nerves. The shinobi nodded and placed a leave application on the desk of his superiors. "This is the first time in. How long have you been in the organization?" "It doesn't matter, though. This is the first time in all this time that you've asked for a vacation." The leader was still surprised, but nevertheless put his stamp and signature on the application. Pain's last words reached Kakuzu just as he was standing at the door. Yes, and take Kaori with you. The poor thing caught a cold on the mission, it wouldn't hurt for her to get some treatment. Chapter 6. Vacation is a mirage of freedom. Beauty. Deciduous centuries-old forest. Greenery all around, the sun is shining, birds are chirping. What a heavenly corner for a quiet rest for 3 shinobi who have chosen this clearing here. Perhaps someone would envy them, if not for. Get down. Daidara's shout was just the thing. Kaori mentally thanked the blonde, watching the needles flying over her head. But she was not allowed to enjoy this undoubtedly exciting spectacle. She urgently had to parry the blow of one of the puppets summoned by the sensei for training. Goronika's tail easily parried the opponent's katana, simultaneously sending the puppet flying to the other side of the training field. And then he himself was attacked by Hiriko's tail. Kaori decided that it would be safer to take her puppet higher into the sky, where Hiriko's powerful attacks would not reach him. The battle was now taking place high above the heads of the shinobi. Between the gray dots of the red sand scorpion puppets, his student's dragon was flying like a bright red golden stroke. The girl had already mastered the technique, thanks to which she could see the battle through the eyes of her puppet. The only downside was that her attention was diminishing, and now she was much less able to understand what was happening in her immediate vicinity. And so the kunoichi noticed the sensei's attack too late. There was no way to cover herself with Goronik from the flying needles, the dragon was too far away. She also did not have time to dodge, but she still tried, minimizing the damage inflicted. However, several senbons still got stuck in the shoulder, and that was enough. Without wasting time to pull out the needles, Kaori listened to her own feelings. So far nothing was happening, and she again devoted all her attention to the puppet. Goronik belched flames, damaging 3 opponents at once, and then banked, evading the enemy's attacks. Several combinations followed, the purpose of which was neither defense nor attack, but rather to show the sensei his mastery of controlling the puppet. And yet, Kaori made another attempt to attack. She was stopped by a sharp, burning pain in her shoulder, where Akasuna had pricked her with senbon. This only confirmed the obvious, the needles were laced with poison. Further symptoms, such as dizziness, dry mouth, and stinging eyes, narrowed the range of possible poisons to 2. The problem was that the antidote for one of them was the second poison. They seemed to compensate for each other, but if you make a mistake, you will only worsen your situation. In this case, Kaori had no choice. Having sent Goronik into another attack, the girl deftly took out and unrolled the necessary scroll, then, without stopping the movement, she slashed the kunai across her palm. A heavy ruby drop fell down along the intended trajectory and landed right in the center of the drawn seal indicator. All that was left was to wait a couple of seconds. But Sasori wasn't going to make her task easy. How much can you do in a couple of seconds? Quite a lot, actually. For example, dodging dozens of kunai flying, at first glance, randomly. But Kaori had seen this trick enough times to be able to calculate escape routes. And yet, it was not easy at all. She had to apply all the skills that Uchiha had drilled into her over the past years, moving at the limit of speed. Kaori, having caught the approving mutter of her mentor and the blonde's applause, nevertheless concentrated on the scroll. The seal had acquired a shade between blue and violet. Sensei called it indigo. This color dispelled the last doubts about the poison used. And the girl, naturally, had an antidote. Scorpion had trained his student well. Kaori takes Goronik into a slanted loop to avoid an attack from the tail, and at the exit her puppet already attacks. Such aerobatic figures were not given to the girl at once, she had to reread a lot of auxiliary literature on aviation and aerodynamics. It cost her dozens of hours on the training grounds and a lot of breakdowns in her puppet, but for such moments it was worth sweating. What previously seemed an impossible task to her, now came almost automatically. And now such a trick gave her a split second to get a syringe with an antidote. The syringe was double-ended. On each side there was a different poison, one of 2, between which the girl had to choose this time. It was unclear what was worse, the poison or the antidote. A wave of unbearable heat quickly spread from the injection site throughout her body. For a few seconds, Kaori even lost control of the dragon, which, however, only benefited her, since Goranik, who had begun to fall, had just gotten out of the attack. Halfway to the ground, Kaori regained control of the puppet, returning it to its original height. The battle continued. Barrels were replaced by turns and vice versa. Goranik masterfully evaded the attacks of the enemy puppets, from time to time going on the offensive. This could have gone on for a long time. If not for one but. The same thing happened that ended most of the training sessions. Kaori lost control. The chakra thread simply snapped in the middle of another bundle, and Goranik went into free fall. All attempts to regain control failed. Sasori could not help the student now, since her puppet was made of a special material that responded only to her own chakra. A fall from such a height threatened to turn Goranik into a pile of splinters. But at the last moment, a huge clay bird caught the puppet, reducing the damage to a minimum. Sasori shook his head. Only 10 minutes had passed since the training began. And this was the result Kaori had been showing for the last few months. Her meager chakra reserves were making themselves felt. It seemed that this was her limit. Sure, it was better than the minute Kaori had at the beginning, but it was still critically short. And that was despite the fact that he had spared her by not calling his best puppets. But the battles of puppet masters could last more than an hour. It was definitely impossible to let the girl go on a solo mission. With this conclusion, Akasuna no Sasori headed to the leader to report the results of the check, waving his hand as a sign that the training was over. "Don't worry so much, Himem." Deidara tried to cheer the girl up. Kaori sat there as if she had been dropped into water. She had failed again, disgraced herself in front of her sensei. The girl had so hoped to receive praise from Sasori, the one thanks to whom she was still here, in the world of shinobi, but instead she had disappointed him again. It was a shame, because she trained so much, but still didn't move from the spot. "Let's go for a ride?" Dei suggested. Kaori loved flying with him. Standing on the back of his birds, she stopped being afraid of heights. And since then they often enjoyed the speed and height of flight together. And now Kaori pulled herself together, gathered her will into a fist, and instantly jumped onto the bird's back. "But you'll have to hold me," the girl warned, clinging to the blonde as the bird gained altitude. She didn't even have enough chakra left to anchor herself to the clay surface. "Not the first time, yes," the demolition man grins, hugging his companion around the waist. A few minutes later, there was no trace of the incipient depression. Kaori was screaming with delight and an excess of adrenaline. Today, Dei really got going, riding his girlfriend. He had a surprise. Without warning, he tripped Kaori, knocking her off her feet. The girl immediately fell, sprawled on the bird's back, with Dei pinning her down with his body. "Hold on tight, yes," the blonde warned, cutting off all the girl's objections. Heeding the warning, Kaori directed all the chakra that had managed to recover during the flight into her arms and legs, trying to secure herself as best she could. And what? She was interrupted by a sharp change in flight direction. The bird suddenly began to lose altitude. Moreover, what did it say in the book? A descent in a steep downward spiral of small radius with simultaneous rotation relative to all three axes. It seems that one of the encyclopedias described a corkscrew. This is exactly the trick that Deidara's bird had just performed, carrying 2 passengers on its back. It was both exciting and terrifying. And Kaori couldn't decide whether to thank Dei for the demonstration or strangle him for it. And this blonde misunderstanding was as happy as a 5-year-old. How could you be angry with someone like that? "You haven't wasted your time," Kaori remarked a few minutes later, when they were resting under the spreading crown of a 300-year-old oak tree. Giving in to temptation, Kaori ruffled her best friend's hair, imagining herself as an older sister praising her little brother for riding a bike without falling once. In response to this gesture, the little brother demonstratively pouted, pretending to be mortally offended. And yet, it was obvious that he liked the praise. However, Kaori really appreciated the surprise. The girl had never ridden with Dei during a fight, when the guy really showed a master class. But, even watching his fights from the ground, she had not seen such a trick. This was her trick, borrowed from the pilots of her home world. She learned from books, as well as by trial and error. It was unlikely that Day would read her encyclopedias, which, moreover, were written in Russian. So, he carefully watched her during training, and then adapted everything he saw to his own jutsu. It was not for nothing that she was constantly told that only geniuses were taken into Akatsuki. And what was she doing here? A heavy sigh escaped her lips, distracting Deidara from his game of "I'm mad at you." "Hey, what's wrong again?" The demolition man was surprised. "I'm worthless," the girl sentenced herself. "I'm just a burden to you, I can't do anything." Kaori was ready to burst into tears. That was all he needed. Deidara couldn't stand women's tears. Especially considering that he had no idea how to deal with them. "Okay, stop making a fuss. Dana won't pat you on the head for that. Are you a kunoichi or a wimp? If something doesn't work, stand up and repeat. As many times as it takes to get it right," Deidara commanded, and then sealed it, "Yes." And seeing that the hysteria was being postponed indefinitely, he decided to consolidate his success. "Now march to the bird. You still need to pack your things." Obeying his will, the clay pet crouched a little so that it would be easier for the girl to climb. But noticing the bewilderment in his friend's eyes, he reminded, "You have a vacation from tomorrow." "Then we must hurry," Kaori declared decisively, grabbing the hand extended to her. Packing up turned out to be easier than it seemed at first. Kaori hadn't been to her home world for over 3 years. The fashion there had probably changed. But entering her small room and opening the closet, the girl looked at her simple belongings. Most of the outfits were definitely not suitable for the upcoming trip. Where, by the way? Throwing a couple of t-shirts, a skirt and jeans, miraculously preserved from her last visit to the other world, into her bag, the girl went to the kitchen. No one had cancelled her housework duties yet. And she had a very interesting conversation planned with Deidara. Morning came too quickly. Her eyes categorically refused to open, either because yesterday had been a hard day, or because she had been unable to fall asleep half the night, wondering where she and Kakuzu would end up. The financier had not shown up for dinner yesterday, having decided to eat in his room, so she hadn't managed to find out anything. Haydn brought him the food, because the old curmudgeon didn't even want to see the girl. The fanatic listened for a long time to an angry accusatory speech about a certain individual who made Kaori run back and forth with a full tray, and then offered to bring the food himself. Jinpachi left, humming something about old people dreaming of food, leaving his fellow members of the organization to wonder why he suddenly cared so much about his neighbor. The ash-haired man returned an hour later, pleased with himself and with an empty tray, but he didn't talk about the reasons for such an elevated mood. Which is uncharacteristic of him. Remembering yesterday's incident, Kaori cursed, realizing that yesterday's song had been stuck in her head for a long time. So, involuntarily humming her favorite tune, which had become boring since yesterday, she headed to the kitchen, where they were already waiting for her. Haydn was still grinning smugly. Day greeted her as always, noting that in 5 minutes he himself was going to wake her up. Sasori frowned at her appearance. He hadn't been in a good mood since yesterday. He had been throwing unkind glances all evening while he and Day were discussing the possibility of her flying on Gornik. The blonde was explaining the peculiarities of his control over clay birds, actively gesturing and interspersing his speech with jokes. "Yesterday was fun. But I definitely need to talk to Sensei before I leave. It's not right for him to continue frowning like this." Sasori, the girl was about to wish the red-haired man a good morning and assure him that she would continue training even on vacation. She still naively believed that Akasuna was upset by the result of yesterday's training. But Kakuzu's appearance didn't let her finish. The financier simply grabbed her by the collar, like a naughty kitten, and dragged her out of the cave, saying something about "time is money" and the leader already waiting. The latter was much more stimulating, and Kaori hurried after him. Keeping pain waiting was dangerous to his health. In the clearing that was sadly familiar to the girl, all the Akatsuki members who were currently at the base had indeed gathered. Itachi and Kisame were absent. Konan was in the rain village, and Zetsu was on another hunt. Kaori shuddered at the memories. After all, it was from here that she had been sent to her home world last time. Fortunately, this time everything was different. But the girl could not resist grabbing Kakuzu's hand tighter. Now he was the main guarantee that she would be able to return to her new family. The farewell was crumpled. Kaori only had time to hug Sasori and Deidara goodbye, slap Haiden, who had decided to grope her in the confusion, and promise the leader to obey Kakuzu in everything. And then the portal closed behind the two shinobi. This is a reference to the song The Cursed Old House by the group Coral Eye Shut. Kaori's home world greeted her with January frost, dirty, melted and frozen again, snow and a strong wind that almost knocked her off her feet. Dressed completely inappropriately for the weather, the girl immediately froze to the bone. In search of warmth, she tried to get to the nearest source of heat, some kind of eatery. But the situation was aggravated by the ice. The very first step ended in a fall. Surprisingly, it was Kakuzu who saved her. Having handed her the medallion of the four elements, the Akatsuki simply picked her up and walked forward. Numerous passers-by turned to look at them, seeing them off with envious or sympathetic glances. Trying to ignore everyone, Kaori pressed herself closer to the man in search of warmth. "Aren't you cold?" the girl asked worriedly, examining Kakuzu's far-from-winter outfit. She couldn't make out the answer. The wind and the noise of the city street were in the way. And then there was that bandage on his face. Kaori irritably tore the fabric off and froze. In place of the already familiar stitches were scars, albeit extraordinary, but quite ordinary. Along with this came the understanding that in this world Kakuzu was not an S-class missing nin, but a completely ordinary person, albeit with an unusual history. A little later the question arose of how he managed to walk without slipping even a little bit. "I did not fail to ask about it. I still have a little chakra left, it's enough to gain a foothold on the ice," the shinobi commented. And indeed, walking on ice with chakra is much easier than on the same water. And even Kaori had mastered the latter. Listening to herself, the girl realized that she could use chakra herself. But now she could only control the puppet. But what's the point if she didn't even have enough chakra to summon it? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an opening door. It turned out that Kakuzu had managed to bring her to some shopping center. The size of the building was astounding, and her eyes ran wild from the variety of goods in the windows. Despite the fact that it was much warmer inside and the floor was not at all slippery, Kakuzu was in no hurry to let his companion down, doing so only at the final point of their short journey, a women's clothing store. Opening the door with his foot in a proprietary manner, the man carefully sat his burden in a comfortable soft chair, and he himself headed to the counter, behind which the frightened saleswomen were huddled. As soon as Akatsuki saw something small that sparkled with gold next to the cash register, the girls relaxed and became much friendlier. Kaori also managed to notice how one of them headed to intercept the security guard, whom they had managed to call. After a few phrases from the saleswoman, the guy nodded and went back, and the girl sighed with relief. After giving some instructions to the store staff, Kakuzu approached Kaori. "Buy everything you need. I'll be there in an hour, wait here." With these words the financier left in an unknown direction. The girl didn't have time to get bored. The allotted hour flew by. The frozen client was immediately surrounded by the center's workers, vying with each other to offer goods. A couple of minutes later, she was served hot tea, a special order from Kakuzu. He wouldn't wish even his worst enemy to deal with a cold Kaori. The saleswoman quickly got down to business. Before Kaori had time to finish her tea, she had already been offered half of the far-from-small assortment of fur coats. And each model presented was better than the previous one. Of course, there were some really funny ones, but the girls did their job well, and in 20 minutes the fur coat was selected, and the client was presented with other wardrobe items, including underwear. Moreover, during the hour allotted to them, the girls even managed to provide a special service for VIP clients, an express makeup course, naturally not free. In fact, such a tricky name implied applying makeup and doing her hair. Therefore, when Kakuzu returned, his ward was in all her glory and in full dress and was choosing the last element of her wardrobe, boots. The problem was that she had 2 pairs of shoes that deserved her affection, and she could not choose one of them to the detriment of the other. On the one hand, there were leather boots with very high heels, on the other, a comfortable and no less attractive pair with flat soles. Arguments in favor of one or another pair of shoes arose in Kaori's head, but the girl still could not decide. Previously, she was not on friendly terms with heels. Now, after training in taijutsu, her sense of balance had improved significantly. But it was winter, there was ice, and you never knew what could happen. It was with this problem that the girl turned to Akatsuki. His solution shocked the girl. "Take both," Kakuzu commanded, waiting for all the purchases to be packed. His excitement was betrayed only by a momentary pause and a barely noticeable tension in his voice. If she hadn't known his character, Kaori wouldn't have paid attention to it. The girl couldn't find price tags on any of the purchases, so she could only guess at the amount spent. But judging by the quality of the goods and the level of service, a lot of money was spent. "Oh, there's a reason for all this," flashed through her pretty head. But she was interrupted by Kakuzu's insistent voice, insisting that they were already late, and the car had been waiting for a long time. The doors of the shopping center swung open, letting out the customers, who turned out to be a very young girl and an imposing man of 45 to 50 years old. They were a rather curious, but still nice couple. However, this was already quite usual. From the outside, they resembled a novice, but promising model and her wealthy sponsor. Fortunately, the girl herself did not even suspect this. "And yet, where are we going now, Kakuzu?" the girl asked, getting into an unremarkable taxi. Her companion merely helped her to get comfortable in the car, picking up the hem of her long coat. Without saying a word, the man simply handed her a brochure, and noticing the taxi driver's glance, he also rapped his companion's knees. Kaori paid no attention to these manipulations, absorbed in studying a colorful booklet advertising some island. "Mauritius Island," the girl said thoughtfully some time later. "I've never heard of it, but judging by the advertisement, it should be a wonderful place." "It should," the girl especially emphasized the last word, revealing all her skepticism. "Is something wrong?" Kakuzu decided to clarify. "You see," Kaori tried to find the right words, "a trip to places like this must cost a fortune." Before the girl could finish speaking, she noticed the horror in the Akatsuki's gaze. It seemed she had managed to step on his sore spot after all. "By the way, when is the plane?" Kaori decided to change the subject of the conversation. Especially since they were just approaching the airport. "An airplane?" Kakuzu asked in surprise. And the girl followed the necessary turn with her eyes. "Well, how else are we going to get to?" Kaori glanced at the brochure again, just in case, to make sure she hadn't missed anything. "The Southern Trail? Not by train? It's far, you know." "Are there any other options?" Akatsuki asked sarcastically, pointing somewhere ahead. While the girl was looking for the location of the island, a taxi managed to pull up at the port. "Oh, come on," Kaori couldn't believe her eyes as she got out of the car. And while Kakuzu was arguing with the taxi driver about the fare, his companion was enjoying the salty sea air. Finally, Kakuzu joined her, gently hugging her waist, helping her keep her balance on the ice-slick ground. A sharp gust of wind ripped off her hood and scattered her hair, ruining her hairstyle. Kaori felt that with such success, the fur coat would not be able to keep her warm for long. Winter is not a good time of year for boat trips. Kaori shared these thoughts with her companion. "Don't worry, you'll like it." "I think you've been tricked," the girl remarked. But Kakuzu looked at her in such a way that all doubts disappeared by themselves. The undoubted advantage of traveling with an S-class criminal was the certainty that no one would dare to deceive him. Even if it was a criminal from another world. Especially if it was a criminal from another world. Only when she approached the port building and saw a single ship 100 meters away, moored to the pier, and not inspiring confidence, Kaori sighed. What they would have to sail on was a Soviet-era trawler, from which the sailors were unloading their catch right now. The smell of fish from that side was merciless. Doubt stirred in Kaori's mind again.